is
wasn't great, was it?
Can you imagine, though, 6 months into, say, Blair government or any the idea that he'd be going, oh, yes, I've got full confidence in Gordon Brown.
I know. Absolutely incredible.
It's mind-blowing, that reform poll.
He has come up with some new awards, though, the Mobile Peace Prizes, which, because he couldn't say Nobel Peace Prize. I mean, what's wrong with him?
I mean, bring back the sausages.
Bring back the sausages. I mean, it just goes on. The smuggling guns. You know,
honestly,
we're going to make a whole.
If he hasn't got autocue in front of him, remember his off-the-cuff remark last week. His response to a question of grooming gangs was on the autocue.
I know. Julia Hartley-Brewer is coming next. I'll see you tomorrow.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very, very good morning to you. Thank you very much indeed for joining me. This is Talk. We are the home of common sense. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer, and you are fabulous for joining us, whether you're listening on a DAB+ radio or on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube or on your connected device. Lovely to have your company. Awful lot, as always, to talk about. When is there not a lot to talk about? Coming up in this hour, we're going to be talking about that major new YouGov poll that was for Sky News, released at 10 o'clock last night, but it puts Reform UK just 1 percentage point behind Labour and, crucially, ahead of the Tories. So what does that mean for the leader, Nigel Farage's chances of winning the next election? Well, later in the show, we'll be talking to Reform's chairman, find out what he thinks, but I'd love to know what you think about that. How significant is that poll? Look, you know, the question is, if there's an election tomorrow, i.e. today, how would you vote? But there isn't an election today. Are people just, look, is it a protest vote? Do you think those votes will go back to Labour? Why? I don't know. Do you think they'll go back to the Tories? Kemi Badenoch's leadership of the Tories has seen the party go down 2 points in the polls since the election. I want to hear from you. Do you think Nigel Farage could win the next election? Tell us why you think he could. given first past the post, given, yes, you know, they're second in a load of Labour seats, but they're a long way behind. Does the system we've got mean that it's just not possible for a New Start MP to do that? Or do you think that actually there has been such a big change? There is just a tidal movement now away from Labour, away from the Conservatives, and it is reforms, to lose now? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Tell us if you think Nigel Farage could win or could not win the next election. Tell us why. I'd love to know whether you want him to or not. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. You can text the word talk, then your message to 87222. You can also get in touch on X. Of course, calls, I have to say this bit altogether now, calls are charged at the national rate. Text costs one, standard network rate message. I say this in my sleep. Let's also talk about where we are with the Chancellor. And indeed, one of her deputies in the Treasury, Tulip Siddiq, because yesterday Keir Starmer was forced to shore up support for both women yesterday amid the bond market mayhem and the falling pound. Twice he was asked whether he would support Rachel Reeves still being Chancellor, or can guarantee she'd still be Chancellor until the next election. He didn't do that. Later, another 10 spokesman, obviously being asked again and again and again, did say that. But he certainly had to say he had his full confidence in her. Just 6 months into a Labour government with 411 MPs. What a strange situation to have. Meanwhile, her deputy, Tulip Siddiq, is still mired in the Bangladeshi corruption probe. We'll talk about that. Still don't think she's going to keep her job till the end of the month. Also, very, very promising news coming out of the Middle East with a deal for Hamas to hand back hostages in return for the release of 1,000 Palestinian prisoners, terrorists and criminals. But there's a possibility of that happening. President Joe Biden said a deal was on the brink in his final foreign policy address last night. Plus, as Mike Graham's just been talking about with Charlie Mullins, the Spanish government is planning to impose a whopping 100% tax on Brits who buy holiday homes in Spain under new measures to fix the country's housing crisis. Some 280,000 Brits own homes in Spain. So will that affect you? I'd love to hear your thoughts on all of the stories. Anytime, do get in touch. 0344 499 1000. Tell us what you think. Tell us if you're cross, if you're happy. What particularly want to hear from you, though, on that new YouGov poll. Let's find out what my next guest thinks. Nice to just say commentator Sam Armstrong joins us on a Tuesday for a change. Were you very busy and important doing something else on Monday?
Always. Top secret.
Top secret. You could tell us, but then you'd have to kill me. Yeah.
And the listeners too.
And the listeners.
That would be hard work.
That would take a long time. That would take a long time. Right, let's talk about this reform, this poll. YouGov for Sky News. I have to say that bit. I mean, absolutely fascinating. We were told this is a big poll. I mean, it's not one of those, it's not one of those epics of 20,000 polls. It's like 2,500 people or so. But it's a consistent poll that they carry out, about your voting intention. And these have proved pretty accurate over the years. Labour on 25%, according to this poll. Reform on just 24%, just 1 point behind. Tories at 22%. Lib Dems at 14%. Greens at 8%. How significant is this?
Well, I think it fits a pattern now of polling that is beginning to show a series of consistent things. Firstly, the old days of a two-party system in British politics are just gone. This is no longer two-party politics. We might have two-party representation, but we do not have a two-party country.
Didn't everyone say that in 2010, and then in 2015 we got a majority Tory government again?
Well, I think what is clear now is that the coalitions that existed there do not exist. Nowhere is that more true than on the right of British politics. Back then in 2010, UKIP was sitting at 4, 5, 6 points in the polls. And I tell you what it did back then. That support for UKIP in the 2010 election cost the Conservatives a majority in Parliament, and it meant that we had that Lib Dem coalition. Today, though, it's completely and utterly different. Reform are now sitting ahead of the Tories. I think it's certainly the case when you look at the balance of polls that the Tories and Reform are neck and neck. Yeah. And as a result of that, and I think this is the most consequential thing going on right now in British politics, the Labour Party are still, despite everything going on, despite the widespread, rampant, unprecedented unpopularity for a government so early on in tenure, they are still on track to be able to govern after the next election. Yeah. And that's the remarkable thing.
Yeah, but that's the way our system works. But again, you even have, say, in Germany, and you see what's happening in France as well, even with their proportional representation, which is something I know, well, the Lib Dems were calling for, not so much anymore. Now they've got, 72 seats under the system, even though getting fewer votes than Reform UK, who only ended up with 5 seats. But it's what's happened with in France and Germany is basically whatever happens in the election, the other parties will combine, even far left and the middle, centre right, they will combine to prevent what they consider to be far right, but harder right parties. But it is interesting. If you add up Labour with the Lib Dems and the Greens, you get to 47%. Reform and the Tories, you get to 46%. And the argument for the Tories has long been, well, if it's Reform's fault that we're not in, because actually a lot of those Greens and Lib Dems would never vote Labour. We'd be in power, and it's the fault of Reform. But that shows a certain arrogance. The idea that we deserve to have the votes. Well, I mean, realistically, it's the same as with a lot of these other parties. Reform, UKIP, the Brexit Party, and now the Reform Party, all vehicles for Nigel Farage. They were all created by failures of the Conservative Party to pursue conservative policies.
Absolutely, and for thousands, if not now millions of voters, they are upset, they are disappointed, they feel let down. And why shouldn't they? After 14 years of Conservative government, so-called right-wing government, and of course in 2019, Reform got comparatively few votes because of the deal that Nigel Farage did.
Boris Johnson's majority is almost entirely down to Nigel Farage standing aside in hundreds of seats.
But what did those Reform voters get in exchange for their support?
Yeah.
They got lockdown, they got net zero, they got a watered-down Brexit, and an immigration.
They got people losing their jobs for saying that trans women are men, because that's what they are.
And net migration of over 1 million a year. And you can understand why we've ended up in a situation in which those people are no longer happy. But here's the thing. I do think at this point, looking at the bleakness, sheer bleakness of 10 years of Keir Starmer government, that a deal...
Seriously, I can't do that. I can't do that. I'm leaving. I can't. No, I won't say that because that will make Remainers all happy. I can't do 10 years of Keir Starmer as PM.
Well, what that requires then is a deal. But this deal is not going to be, I think, like last time. I think this deal is going to have to recognise the fact now that Nigel Farage is no longer a supplicant. He's no longer the smaller party.
He's not a little persuader on the side. He's not a little... Yes.
He is a major fixture of British
I don't think
politics.
the Tories were willing to do it. I don't think Nigel Farage is going to be willing to do it. I don't think lots of voters are willing to do it. I think there's a very strong argument.
Well,
a lot of this poll shows also how toxic... just how unbelievably toxic the Conservative brand is, more toxic, interestingly, than Reform. Can I just say, by the way, one of the things I found most fascinating by this poll, and there's so much more I want to talk about, so let's not spend too long on this, but the most fascinating thing is that when people were asked, whether the first 6 months of Keir Starmer's premiership, whether it had been good or not, whether it had been successful or not, 60% said unsuccessful, various other people said, neither unsuccessful. 10% of those polled said that it had been a successful first 6 months. And I tweeted last night, what would an unsuccessful 6 months look like? Another pandemic, total economic collapse, nuclear war, or what else? But what I absolutely love though is the fact that people were pointing out that those 10% were made up of, and this is just wonderful. People were pointing out it's train drivers, NHS workers. Someone pointed out public sector lanyard tards. You know exactly what they mean by that as well. You know who those people are. Oh, there's a certain sort of, particularly certain sort of woman, isn't there, a lanyard tard? They said...
Rachel from accounts.
Rachel from accounts epitomises that, and people who are working in the BBC, people in the BBC canteen, and nonsense. They said basically that does account for the 10% of the population who think, no, it's all gone great.
Well, this is the genius of Keir Starmer, and credit to him and Morgan McSweeney. They have a very clear sense of who their people are. They know who those people are.
Public sector
workers. They know
workers.
what they want, and they are intent on giving it to them. And they are 30% in total of the British public. And if that 30% of the British public, which would represent a small drop in Keir Starmer's support, and remember he got fewer votes than Jeremy Corbyn once did, if they come out again for the Labour Party and the Conservative and Reform votes split evenly, Keir Starmer is going to be Prime Minister for 10 years.
With another big majority. That's the reality.
Big majority.
Your reaction to that, folks, give us a call, 0344 499 1000. Should there be a deal? But who should be the stronger party in the deal? Let's talk about where Labour are, though, because the fact that Keir Starmer, 6 months into his terribly successful premiership, after waiting all these years, the Great White Hope, the fact that he's having to doing some speech about AI, talking abject nonsense about our future as an AI superpower, never going to happen because of our energy costs, because of other the policy he and the Tories have been pursuing for years, he had to shore up his Chancellor. Rachel Reeves just back, bleary-eyed from China. She's making a statement in the House of Commons later today. No doubt that's going to go not very well. Not very good at thinking on her feet, same as the Prime Minister. But basically, if you're being asked, do you have full confidence in your Prime Minister, and twice you're asked and refused to answer whether that your Chancellor will still be Chancellor in the next election. Now, actually, no Prime Minister could guarantee anyone in their job election. But that's... And then later on, Downing Street having to say yes, because, of course, those questions continued. And, one of her deputies in the Treasury, Tulip Siddiq, the anti-corruption minister, Charities now saying, because she's being probed over corruption and involved with her former Bangladeshi Prime Minister, her aunt, and a flat that she owns in King's Cross, supposedly given to her by a close ally of her aunt, that actually doesn't appear to be declared properly, that she shouldn't even be allowed to do that part of her job, because someone being investigated for corruption can't be in charge of overseeing anti-corruption. I mean, we've already lost Transport Secretary, Louise Haigh, a month or so ago. I mean, this is not going terribly well. Well,
Julia, isn't it great to have the grown-ups back in charge? We were promised an end to the drama, an end to the scandal, an end to all of it. And as you say, we've had a Transport Secretary sacked for being a literal fraudster. We have an anti-corruption minister under investigation for corruption. We have an economy in which every single warning light is blinking, is ringing, the alarms are sounding. We are literally at the stage where I think we could now see a small-scale runs on banks in the near future because of the lack of trust, lack of faith in the economic plan that this country's got. And by the way, the economic wealth creators are fleeing en masse.
Oh, yeah, bye-bye.
And all of those promises of higher investment in public services... And growth, what are we seeing instead? Cuts from the Labour Party. Why? Because they have squeezed taxpayers too hard, too fast, and they've ended up into economic
They got worse, but as your party did for years as well. But the reality is, I mean... they box themselves in with so many of these promises. Oh, we're not going to raise this tax, that tax. They have to do other taxes. They end up having to make spending cuts if that's what they do. They can't borrow anymore. The cost is untenable. They may well end up upsetting the very constituents who vote for them. But I think to avoid doing that, they'll end up making really bad cuts. I would love it if they massively cut the benefits bill. Do I think that they will cut the right stuff from benefits, as in basically saying to people, no, you can go back to work? No, I don't think they will. And by the way, the time to have done that was when the jobs market was booming, and not now. It's fascinating. Again, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that as well. 0344 499 1000. I mean, I don't see her surviving. I mean, Rachel from accounts has not proved to be a very good... You can already hear, some backbench MPs anonymously briefing newspapers saying she's got to go, she's part of the problem, and they need a U-turn. I don't know if Keir Starmer particularly understands the economics, but I worry that neither does the Chancellor, which is a concern. Let's talk about international affairs, though. Joe Biden last night, his final foreign policy speech before he shuffles, and it will be a shuffle, off the world stage by Monday with the inauguration of Donald Trump. He's saying that we are looking at being on the brink of a ceasefire deal and a hostage return deal between Israel and Hamas. We've got, very senior people flying in to Doha to Qatar, so to have this conversation, to finalise things. Again, we've got this, apparently this close before and nothing's happened, but we're looking at the return of, who knows, somewhere between 80 and 100 hostages, hopefully still alive, but that they would be released on a staged basis over a period of weeks. Also the release of 1,000+ prisoners, Hamas terrorists back on the streets. Lots of aid money to Gaza. Oh, I wonder how that'll be spent. We know how the last lot was spent by Hamas. I can really understand why people are desperate to get this deal. My God, if it was my family member, I'd want it more than anything in the world. But you can also understand why many on the right in Israel, especially in Benjamin Netanyahu's government, are saying, we're just going to... What's the point of trying to defeat Hamas now if we're just going to allow them to rebuild in a few months' time?
Well, I've no doubt that, like every deal the Democrats seem to do in the Middle East, it will be a bad deal. But
especially Biden wants to get the deal before Monday.
Well, this is a really interesting thing about American politics, and that's the timing of this. Changes in president trigger massive foreign policy implications, and actually, getting the hostages back is, in my view, the first foreign policy achievement of Trump's second term. Yep. Why are Hamas coming to the negotiating table now? Yep. Because they think if they're still holding hostages, there's a kick-off in the region and Donald Trump is sat in the Oval Office, boy are they going to be in for something in the form of direct US military action. And what you're seeing here is Hamas rushing to try and do a deal through. Now, they might still get a good deal. They might not. Who knows? Yeah. But actually what they're trying to do is they're trying to get this all resolved before Trump is there. And that's,
he said all hell will break out. I mean, that's a great threat. It's just he has made it really clear with his Secretary of State and all his statements previously. He is 100% on the right side. Israel, the side that has not provoked the war. And I'm saying fully supportive of that. We shall see what happens. What do you make also of this special counsel report that's been released? I mean, just days before Donald Trump is going to be signed into office. Special counsel Jack Smith has been looking into whether or not there was evidence of Donald Trump inspiring his supporters to commit acts of physical violence, the January 6th riots back in 2021. And he says there is clear enough evidence for a jury to convict him. And he basically said if he knowingly spread a false narrative about fraud in the 2020 election, and basically if he hadn't been elected as the next president and therefore has presidential immunity, he would have been able to convict him. I agree with Jack Smith. I am glad Donald Trump is elected and not Kamala Harris. I think there's going to be lots of good things coming out of it. There might be some bad things as well, but lots of good coming out of it. But I also feel that what he did in 2021 was absolutely beyond the pale and undemocratic. But is this helpful now?
Well, I mean, actually, I thought what the protesters or the rioters on January 6th did was treasonous. I thought it was wrong. It was appalling, and they should have been punished to the full extent of the law. I actually don't agree with what Jack Smith's saying, and actually what I think it is it represents the end of this kind of politicisation of the justice system.
There's always been politicised in America. It is intended to be politicised.
It is a relatively recent phenomenon that every single president now gets shoved under investigation by their successor, and it's sad because it sends America to the kind of things we see in tin pot dictatorships around the world, the kind of things that we see in the developing world. And actually, I think it's actually wrong to prosecute someone on the basis of setting a false narrative. I mean, that is a major assault on free speech, which in America is protected under the First Amendment, which is you have the right to speak. Now, look, you might think Donald Trump is mad for saying what he said about the election. You might think there is no leg to stand on the fact he was defrauded on the election. I would agree with you. But that does not give you the right to prosecute him.
He entreated, was it the Georgia Attorney General to, quote, find votes. I'm sorry, that's electoral corruption.
Right, there was one... Right, firstly,
it's on tape.
Firstly, that is not the particular charge that we're talking about here.
Okay, yeah.
What we're talking about here is inspiring in January the 6th. But and secondly, look, I think that was one extract out of a large thing. Now, look, I agree that what Donald Trump did there was shameful and wrong. But I think the moment you go down the line of prosecuting your political predecessors and successors and rivals for things that they have said that you disagree with, you are in very dangerous waters.
Oh, no, I do absolutely agree with you on that, whether or not it's a good thing or not. Look, we're going to take a quick break. It's 10:22, and we'll be back in just a couple of moments. We'll take your calls. I do want to hear your thoughts on all of the big stories. Also going to talk about pubs. Free speech in pubs might be under... the fun police under attack once again. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. This is Talk.
It's obviously a very horrid situation for everybody. There is some disquiet, is there not, at the very least, about the way that the authorities have handled all of this.
At the moment, I think people here are just in that panicked fight or flight mode. It really is. You're in the lap of the gods. Everybody's on edge. Nobody feels safe.
As you know, where I live is on fire right now. Literally, the entire city of the Pacific Palisades is burning.
Any message from you to Governor Newsom or Karen Bass tonight?
Spend less on hair gel. What can I say to them? Not big admirer of either.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very good morning to you. This is Talk, the home of common sense. Thank you very much indeed for joining me. 10:26 is the time. Sam Armstrong is still with me. Sam, just before we go to our calls, just want to get onto one other story we mentioned just before the break. Pubs, this is a headline, pubs could ban patrons from Talk patrons. Patrons? I never know, patron.
Patrons.
Patrons, it is patrons. I'm suddenly thinking I got the wrong pronunciation. Randomly, having worked in pubs. Pubs could ban, we call them customers, could ban customers from talking about transgender rights and various other things because of a concern over concern for Labour's workers' rights reforms. This is extraordinary. Employers must protect workers from being harassed at work by third parties, so customers, clients, anyone else in the pub. If they fail to do so, they could be sued by those workers. And this is there is a warning from the Equalities Watchdog, the Equality and Human Rights Commission, saying that, well, thing is, you know, they talk about contentious beliefs. So contentious beliefs, for instance, on things like religion or immigration or trans rights. So the idea that it would be contentious, that if I was a barmaid, and I used to call myself a barmaid, and I was thinking, and someone was saying that they thought that, for instance, that trans women were actually women, I could disagree with them, have an argument about them, or not get involved. But either way, I'd be able to sue my employer, or it's the other way round, and someone with blue hair would be complaining because I was saying, well, of course, trans women are men because that's biological truth. Now, whether or not that is a philosophical belief that is protected under law, no, it's biological reality. It shouldn't even be considered a belief. Someone could sue their employer because they overheard a conversation of people saying things they didn't agree with. What on earth has happened to this country? What on earth has happened?
Let me tell you, there will be people listening to this who think we're exaggerating or overblowing this. Let me say this is the most dramatic, significant piece of legislation to go through Parliament in a very, very, very long time. This will hugely expand the number of claims that can be brought before the courts about what employers can do. And as a result, it will force any company that interacts with the public to take inordinate steps to police what you and I say to each other. Let me just give you one other example. If at a football stadium the crowd shout at the ref, "You must be blind, mate."
Oh yes, but it's usually a slightly stronger language than that.
Were they to say that a partially sighted member of staff working elsewhere could sue the football club?
Oh my God!
For harassment, so-called harassment, for overhearing that claim. Now, as a result, pubs, football stadiums, any business that interacts with the public are going to have to display notices, are going to have to employ banter bouncers to walk around to police what individual customers say. It will have inordinate, extreme reaches into the daily interactions of everybody. But let me tell you the most shameful thing about this piece of legislation.
More shameful than that?
Yes. It was first proposed by the Conservative government. And in particular...
Let's go back to that poll that's put Reform ahead of the Conservatives. I wonder if these things are related.
And in particular, I regret to inform you that the minister responsible for the department that proposed this was one Kemi Badenoch.
Ooh.
It was originally brought in as a private member's bill by the Lib Dems, supported by the Government Equality Office, led by Kemi Badenoch.
Kemi Badenoch's been really sound a lot of this stuff, but yeah, at the end of the day, 14 years, this madness has been happening mostly in the last 14 years, and the Tories have been in charge. And I'm sorry, I hold them responsible for not stopping it. I think this could be stopped. I expect Donald Trump to stop this madness day one with executive orders in America. That's exactly what I need here. I mean, these are things I cast my vote on. And look, let's go to the callers on reform. And again, it's all related, isn't it? We've put the fun police in charge of the country. They've basically been quietly running the country while the Tories did nothing about it for the last 14 years. Now we've actually got the fun auditors in charge. Let's go to Herbie, who is in Harrow and has given us a call on 0344 499 1000. Very good morning to you, Herbie. What do you want to say?
Good morning. Well, it's about reform and Nigel Farage. I mean to say the awakening has happened now. We've had the two-party system for so long and nothing's been done. The refreshing reform may make a change in our lives once and for all. Thank God for that. We need something because this lot that we've now got in is just a nightmare.
Do you think they can realistically do it? Because that's the thing. What someone says in a poll is one thing. Where parties lie in terms of they can spread their vote out. I mean, the Liberal Democrats. I mean, they've done very well on the first past the post this time round, but didn't for many years. I remember the SDB years when they got 25% of the vote and barely scraped a few MPs. It completely depends where your votes are. Do you think he could actually do it? Do you think they're on a trajectory where they could hit sort of the magic, either high 20s or 30%, where they could actually turn it into serious numbers of MPs?
Well, it all depends how the party performs in getting the message to the people. We've got to let the people know that I think we've suffered for so long with these two-party systems that's gone on and on and on. I mean, to say, look at the state of the country now after only 6 months of the Labour government. I mean, to say, how much worse can it get? I mean, to say, last night I was watching Newsnight and the...
What? Sorry, Herbie. Sorry, are you on medication of some sort?
Listen, I was watching a very interesting subject called the Post Office disaster. I mean to say, the Post Office Minister, who I know very well, thank you very much, and he admitted that they have not agreed to pay in full the compensation to these poor postmasters that suffered for so long. They're offering them 10 or 27%. There was a 92-year-old woman on there who said that what they're waiting is they're waiting for her to die so they don't have to pay out. How much more scandalous can this country go?
I hate to tell you, Herbie, it's going to get a lot worse from here on in. Herbie, thank you for your call. Appreciate that. Let's go to Ben, who is in Bristol. Hello, Ben.
Hi, Julia.
Hello.
Your researchers said to me...
Have I got a researcher? It's my producer.
Whoever it was, the woman on the phone, she said, what do you think about this reform thing? Hand on heart, I think it's amazing.
Yep.
I think it's amazing. And I hope, but I hope it goes further, that being neck and neck in the polls, that's not enough.
Yeah.
The thing is that what people are disenchanted with is our political system, and people are sold to the system. We know Starmer's sold to the system, but so's Kemi to some degree. She talks radical, but she voted for all kinds of terrible things during COVID. She says she doesn't want to lead the ECHR. She's snobbish towards reform. She says they're not a serious party. These politicians, Julia, they don't get it. They're in cloud cuckoo land. They have no idea what the average bloke in Britain or woman in Britain thinks. They don't know. We hate net zero. We hate what they did to us in COVID. We hate they're being sold out to various bodies. It's dreadful. The Tories, like half of them are on this climate change committee and they get paid off by it and all this sort of stuff. And they never renounce it.
I think it's that political elite thing. And by the way, I hate to tell you, most people don't hate what happened to us during COVID. Most people still think it was the right thing to do because, of course, they watch things like the BBC and they don't know the full facts. I mean, that's the terrifying thing.
Well, they should do, and a good leader will tell them what they should hate and what they shouldn't hate. And that's why we like Farage. The reform aren't perfect, and I'm a bit unnerved by this Charlie Mullins joining and all this sort of stuff. But, they're better than these guys, and they're not sold to the system. There's no way these guys are sold to the system. The problem with reform is, it's all bloke. I went to their party conference. I've got to be honest, Julia. There wasn't a single person under 50 there, and they're not. Their reach has got to go quite a lot broader.
Honestly,
selling out.
Yeah, that's true. At most party conferences, most people are older, but also, interestingly, Reform are actually polling higher now among under 24-year-olds than I think, certainly the Tories, I think Labour as well. And we've seen that across with the right-wing parties in Europe. They're actually polling very high under 30s. So that may change over the coming years. Listen, I'm going to have to leave this there. Ben, thank you so much for your call. And do please call again. 0344 499 1000 is the number to have your say. We've got to go to a break now. Up next, we'll talk to a Tory pollster about that result, because it's not only just good for Reform, it's bad for Labour. It's also pretty darn bad for Tories and Kemi Badenoch. We'll talk about that up next. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very good morning to you. 10:37 is the time. This is Talk, the home of common sense. Sam Armstrong is still with me. Interested to get your thoughts on what my next guest had to say. Lord Hayward. Robert Hayward is both a Conservative peer, also a pollster. And he has, we always say, Robert, don't you? You speak with two different hats. Can we talk to you with your pollster hat on today about the YouGov poll? And this puts, of course, Reform just 1 point behind Labour. If people are just tuning in, Reform on 24, Labour at 25. But the Tories, crucially, behind at 22. This Lib Dems at 14, Greens at 8. Basically, this is a question that if there were an election tomorrow, how would you vote? How significant is this poll?
It's of interest, Julia. I always try and answer your question as an independent polling analyst, not as a Conservative, and I enjoyed our conversations.
I'm feeling a butt. Is anyone else feeling a butt coming?
I wasn't going to use the word but the opinion polls, taking it as YouGov's opinion poll at the general election was 5 to 6% out on Labour. Overestimate, it was 2% out on the Conservatives. What you have to take any opinion poll, and I've said this to you and to other programmes before, is directional, not specific. Please do not take those figures as accurate.
Right.
The analysis done by a number of eminent academics is that at the last general election, the opinion polls in Britain were the most inaccurate they've ever been. But the message is clear. We are in three-party politics at the moment. Labour have been hit very hard, which, again, I've said on your programme previously. The Conservatives are not making progress, and Reform are the ones that are.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, it's all about the direction of travel, isn't it? Now, there's also the big issue of, you can be doing X or Y in the polls. A, when there's an election, people focus their minds differently and often look at their individual constituency. B, it depends how those votes are distributed. I just mentioned earlier, I remember the days of the SDP getting 25% and barely more than a handful of votes. We saw, Lib Dems have got fewer votes than Reform, and yet they've got way more seats. These things, these things are incredibly dependent on where your votes are, how they fall. Because the Reform Party is behind, just coming in second in 90-odd seats. But and the vast majority of those they're behind in Labour seats. We think, oh, that's good for them. They could take Labour seats. But the reality is they are way behind. We're looking at 45% for Labour and 15% for Reform. How likely is it, even in this world where we see Trump shock elections and National Rally and the AfD in France and in Germany and Giorgia Meloni winning in Italy with different political systems and voting systems, of course, but how likely is it that Reform could actually end up being the largest party at the next election?
What's interesting is in recent months there's been a lot of council by-elections all over the country, and particularly in the most recent months, November and December, post the budget in effect, the Reform Party has leapt in by-election results, but particularly in what are described as the cities, the industrial heartlands, the Labour heartlands, the sorts of places you just identified where Reform are second, but a long, long way behind. Reform took a seat off the Labour Party in Wolverhampton. They took another council seat off St Helens. They just missed one in Sheffield. Now, your listeners and viewers will recognise there's a theme there. It's the Labour industrial heartlands that Reform have been doing really well in. And the thing that you will be concentrating on possibly tomorrow, the MP for Runcorn, Mike Ainsbury, is in court. Yeah. Will that result in a by-election, possibly? Yeah. Reform were miles behind Labour, but they were second. So you'll be asking the question post the court case tomorrow, what chances of Reform in Runcorn? Yeah. And I think the answer is that they've got a good opportunity there to show what they can do, because they are threatening the Labour Party in those sorts of...
It could be absolutely fascinating. With your Tory hat on, as a Tory peer, how damaging is this poll for the Conservative Party? Because their argument has always been, Reform, this sort of little yapping dog. They're the ones who have to basically, give up their candidates for us. We are the rulers. We're the longest surviving party, most successful party in European history. We're the big dogs. But also, how damaging is it for Kemi Badenoch, having only been leader a couple of months?
Look, the Tory party lost the last election. The Labour Party didn't win it, and they lost it because the electorate said, we don't want you any longer. We've had enough of you. And on that basis, you don't suddenly turn round the mood of the electorate. It's going to take a year or 2 years. So...
hold on a minute, but we've already seen a massive change for the vote for Labour down. That's plummeted.
Yes, but that's different. I'm talking here about the mood of the electorate towards the Conservative Party, which was displayed very clearly at the general election. We don't want you anymore. Yeah. And what Kemi and the current leadership has got to do is convince the electorate, and particularly those people who abstained, went to other parties as well, but there's a huge number who abstained. They've got to convince them that they should come back to the Conservatives, and that takes a long time. It doesn't take 2 months of leadership or 6 months of leadership. It takes a year or 2 years, because we aren't going to have an election till 2029.
That's the reality. Do you think that when we do have that election, that Rachel Reeves will still be Chancellor? Because a couple of times the Prime Minister yesterday, at his big AI speech, was asked, did he, he had full confidence in his Chancellor. I mean, realistically, no one thinks Tulip Siddiq is still going to be a Treasury Minister at the end of the month. No one. Probably including Tulip Siddiq. Probably including Keir Starmer. But the fact that he has to answer questions about the future of his own Chancellor just 6 months in, it's pretty telling, isn't it?
It is telling. There's no question about it. I certainly did not expect that 6 months, 6.5 months into a Labour government, one would be in a position where we're discussing quite seriously, quite genuinely, whether Rachel Reeves will be in position. She was the most obvious minister, along with Wes Streeting, for their positions in government.
Yeah.
And we have this amazing position. In answer to your question, politics comes and goes. I have no idea. You know that I only make election predictions about 10 days out.
Yeah.
Because events, dear boy, events. So
yes,
I have
very
no
wise.
idea whether Rachel Reeves will be in situ at the end of this year or at the next general election.
Yes, very wise. Well, I have to say, when the Daily Star has on their front page that they're considering buying a new lettuce, should we be popping out for another lettuce, they're asking. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see that page. They've mocked up, as they did with Liz Truss, like, would Liz Truss survive in the Premiership longer than a lettuce would survive? And they pictured it every day. Now, when you start having images like that, I mean, when they're mocking you, and they're questioning your future, it doesn't bode well.
You're absolutely right. If you become the subject of cartoons and you don't have to put a name to the cartoon, everybody understands it automatically, you have very serious problems. And there's no question about it that the reference to the lettuce, which everybody thought would be forever with Liz Truss, is now very clearly identified with Rachel Reeves as well.
Absolutely.
And I, by the way, agree with you on Tulip Sadiq. I cannot see that she can continue in that role.
Oh, I'm going to get a new MP. Oh, hurrah. Lord Robert Hayward.
I didn't say that. I said she couldn't continue as a minister.
Minister, no, fair point. But oh, I'm not going to get a new MP. Anyway, Lord Robert Hayward, Conservative pollster MP, thank you very much indeed. A fair correction there. Sam Armstrong, just particularly on the lettuce issue. Now, it's a Daily Star. It's a silly joke, about lettuce. But that really caught the mood of the country. They caught the imagination of the country back in 2022 when the people were asking whether Liz Truss was going to survive. When you are being mocked this early on, I mean, even the memes about Keir Starmer, the nicknames, free, two-tier Keir, free gear Keir, all of those things. This stuff, I mean, when you're being mocked, there's a reason why dictators don't allow humour and they censor free speech, because mockery is one of the strongest powers we have in a democracy, isn't it? But these people are supposed to be, at the top of their game. They've just been elected, they're in power, they've got another 4.5 years, and they are being ruthlessly mocked. Does that tell you much?
Well, I think the biggest problem that Labour have got, and I don't say this in a pejorative sense, this is me talking as a political consultant, is that so many of these ministers are personality-free zones. I mean, literally the most interesting thing about Rachel Reeves is the fact that she's got a bob haircut. I mean, if you ask...
Not even a very nice one.
If you ask the majority of people in this country what they knew about her, that would be what you would get in a focus group. And as a result, everybody's views, everyone's thoughts, all of these disasters are so easy to project onto her because she's a blank, semi-interesting canvas.
Yeah, exactly. There was credibility, but now that credibility is shot because it turns out she's Rachel from accounts and the complaints department and not Rachel, the economist at HBOS, as she claims. Anyway, love to hear your thoughts on all of that. Give us a call. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Just some breaking news for you, by the way, on migrants, because remember, we've also in the last 6 months seen the smashing of the gangs. Do you remember that? Remember we got that memo? 260 migrants came across the Channel in the UK on 5 boats just yesterday. Takes the total for this year so far on January the 14th to 388. Well done, Keir. It's all going terribly well. This is Talk.
The most pernicious part of this government is that the messaging, everything they've said, has been very deliberate in regards to, without bringing in the legislation, shutting down opposition speech.
Yes.
Free speech. We've heard it all.
Right.
If you express a view that is not towing the Labour left party line, then you are immediately branded as being far right.
Right.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Well, let's talk about two big travel stories right now with Simon Calder, travel correspondent at The Independent. Very good morning to you, Simon. Let's start with news coming from Spain, that the Spanish government is planning to put a whopping great property tax on foreigners, non-EU foreigners buying homes in Spain. So that, of course, will include Brits, mostly aimed at Brits, I imagine, given some 284,000 Brits own homes, largely in southern Spain. And that tax is, when I say whopping, I mean definitely whopping, 100% of the value of the home. Tell us why they're doing this and how on earth it will work.
Well, look, Julia, first of all, the reason I am sniggering is because I will frankly eat my sombrero were this ever to come to pass. This is complete tosh. So it's entirely, Pedro Sanchez is purely speaking to the domestic market here, who are cheesed off. I think the chances that any British buyer ever has to pay 100% tax on a place in Spain is zero. But is there a housing crisis in Spain? Yes. Is that partly because foreign investors as well as Spanish investors are buying up apartment blocks in places like Barcelona and punting them out on platforms such as Airbnb? Yeah. Yes. That has absolutely nothing to do with the average Brit who wants a place in the sun, as you will be aware.
And most of those have been, they've been new builds, haven't they? I mean, so they're not homes, but new builds, sort of holiday, resort sort of places. But we've seen that big fuss in Barcelona of people out on the streets being really quite aggressive. Although I know lots of people have been to Barcelona during and since those reports and said they had no issues and felt that they were very welcome. This idea that, look, all these local people, they can't buy a home, they can't rent a home because they're all going out on Airbnb, and that's clearly an issue. Look, we've got that issue in London and some other cities like Edinburgh in this country as well. But he's threatening to do this 100% tax. Again, that would just kill off anyone buying a place in Spain. But that, of course, would also damage the Spanish property market, would it not?
Well, it's arguably overheated, and so it could come down. It could do with coming down a bit. But like any property market, Julia, of course, it's got various components. And exactly as you say, British people want to be on a nice urbanization up in the.
Almost like being there, Simon.
Yeah, thank you very much. Shush.
It's better than my Spanish accent to be. Dos cerveza. That's all I've got.
And my friend is paying is also the other bit you need to. Anyway, so crucially, yes, this is. If you want one of those places, then it's fine. It's actually a really important part of the local economy, having these colonies of foreigners there. And actually, I think a bigger story. And I'm sorry to mention Brexit, but most definitely. The market has tanked since Brexit because, of course, we said we'd like to be restricted to just 90 days and 180 days. And therefore, a bigger story is people trying to offload properties, not being taxed 100%.
A small point also, by the way, the Brexit happened around the same time we had this thing called lockdown and people weren't allowed to travel and people couldn't get anything done. And then also the people who bought places abroad, like, my parents' generation, the baby boomers, the next generation, just even a few years down, don't have the same money, and therefore that was just almost like a one-off blip of a bunch of people who bought homes for 20 grand that they were able to sell for $500,000 and then buy a place in Spain or France or wherever.
Yes, exactly.
Lucky
right.
lot.
Well
yes, done, parents.
Right.
My generation can't afford to do that.
Well, no, but look, it is a big problem what's happening in Spain. But 1/8 of the economy is tourism. Probably a higher proportion of jobs in Spain depend on tourism.
And a lot of that tourism is from us. I mean, there is.
Yes.
We are their number one tourism arrivals. I mean, they'd be crazy to pee us all off. That's for sure. It is fascinating though. This again, for foreigners being the problem. That said, there are a lot of countries. Switzerland's one of them. I think Sydney in Australia have a lot of strict rules about non-patriots buying homes in their country, and there are perfectly good reasons for that. I wonder, though, whether this is going to affect flights out to Spain generally, and I wonder what Michael O'Leary, the Ryanair chief, often controversial, what he wants to do is whether that's going to have an impact as well, because the chief executive of Ryanair is demanding that European airports introduce a limit of 2 alcoholic drinks per passenger as part of a crackdown on drunken behaviour. He's gone on Brussels to intervene. Oh, he loves Brussels, doesn't he? He's made demands in the UK as well. He wants passengers to stop getting too drunk before boarding. Now, I mean, you could be drunk before you get to the airport. You could go to different bars in the airport. I'm not sure how you do that. But we do already have rules to prevent drunk people getting on board and drunk people being served on a plane. I mean, stewardesses can say, sorry, I'm not serving you. You're already clearly inebriated because you're now a risk to yourself and the rest of the people on this plane. But this is after yet another case where we've had someone very, very drunk, very disorderly, terrifying the living daylights out of everyone on a plane being diverted, and then fines being issued. I mean, I think people who do this sort of behaviour should be sued within the inch of their lives by every passenger on the plane who's lost a day of holiday and has been terrified. But I mean, is this the answer, a 2-drink limit, or should airlines just enforce the rules that are already there, which are, if you're drunk, you're not allowed to get on a plane?
Very much the latter, yes. I think the 2-drink limit, which Michael O'Leary is calling for, when you talk to the airlines, the airports, etc., it's completely unenforceable. Suppose you and I, what a joy that would be, we're going on holiday, and I have my 2 drinks, and you, of course, were staying completely on the wagon. I'd just say, Julia, can you nip off and buy me a
that wouldn't happen. By the way, Simon, you're the only person who goes on more holidays than me. So you're not a fan of that. Simon, great to talk to you. I very much appreciate that. Thank you for that. Sam Armstrong's still in the studio. You don't like banning things generally. This is an unenforceable rule. Michael O'Leary, I mean, this is the man who wants to charge us to go and have a pee, for goodness sake, on a plane. But he is right about people being drunk. But then, it's his ground crew who allowed someone onto the plane who was already drunk. I've been on a plane where a bunch of guys actually, Russian guys getting on the plane, and they all got on the plane and they were absolutely smashed. I mean, you could see, rolly guys, the stench of the booze. They were sitting quite near me, and lots of us were quite wary, and everyone's getting a bit worried. And the cabin crew actually got the captain to come out before we took off, and the captain said, genuinely, you put your seatbelts on. If you want to go to the toilet, you put your hand up and a crew member will come and escort you to the toilet one by one. Otherwise, you don't leave your seats. If you make so much of the noise, I will divert the plane. You will be fined. You'll be arrested. He was so strict. My view was they shouldn't have been allowed on the plane in the first place, because drunk people are a danger to other passengers. But why don't we just, like with pubs, the same issue, just enforce the laws we've already got?
Yeah, and there needs to be real lasting consequences, not just actually for when planes are diverted, but for when passengers make it very unpleasant for those around them. They should be banned from going on.
Someone is out of control, fine. We've had people trying to open, airline doors while they're mid-air. I mean, that is terrifying.
Ban them from flying, but don't stop me from drinking. I mean, for starters, I need more than 2 drinks to cope with Ryanair. I've got to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Last time I was on Ryanair, it was delayed for 4 hours, and of course he's not suggesting that he be stopped from selling them further drinks when they
on
get
the
on
plane.
On
Yeah,
board
you make a very, very good point. Yes, what we like is we would like to sell them the drinks to get them drunk. He's always after another quid, isn't he, Michael O'Leary? Sam Armstrong, thank you very much indeed for that. Don't forget to put your calls in. Love to hear your thoughts on that. I bet you've all been drunk on planes, knowing you lot. 0344 499 1000. Love to hear your thoughts on all the subjects we're talking about, including the future of Rachel Reeves and indeed the future of reform after that poll yesterday. It's all coming up. This is Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very good morning to you and welcome back to the show. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. This is Talk. We are, of course, the home of common sense. And whether you're listening on DAB+ radio or on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube or on your connected device, it is great to have your company. I'm with you live all the way, well, live-ish, all the way until 1 o'clock. Lots more to talk about. We're going to talk more about this major new YouGov poll that came out at 10 o'clock last night. Puts Reform UK just 1 percentage point behind Labour, but crucially ahead of the Tories. Is this the direction of travel we are going to see? How much bad news is it for Kemi Badenoch? How much bad news is it for Keir Starmer? The reform threatening both? Or does our voting system mean that actually, realistically, you can have as many polls like this as you want, but we're not going to see a reformed government? I'd love to know your thoughts on that. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. Text the word TALK. Then your message to 87222. Get in touch on X at talkTV. And, of course, don't forget that altogether now, calls are charged at the national rate. Text cost 1, standard network rate message. Also going to be talking in this hour about the President-elect Donald Trump engaged in an unprecedented criminal effort to overturn his 2020 election defeat. Who's saying that? Well, a report by the special counsel Jack Smith of the United States. He said, look, if he hadn't actually won the presidency and doesn't now from Monday have presidential immunity, I would have been able to prosecute and I would have got a guilty verdict. That could have meant jail time for the past and future president. We'll talk about that in the next half hour. Also going to be talking more about pubs and the fun police. They could have to ban customers from speaking about contentious beliefs like religious views or transgender rights, although since when did biological fact become contentious? Over fears of falling foul of Labour's workers' rights reforms. A barmaid could sue if she overhears a conversation she doesn't like. Oh, for goodness sake. Also, Keir Starmer under mounting pressure to U-turn and order a national public inquiry into grooming gangs after the Labour MP for Rotherham and the Labour MP for Rochdale, 2 grooming hotspots, have demanded a fresh investigation. Also, the worry about drones bringing in not just drugs and money and other contraband into prisons, including high-security prisons. Well, the concern about that has been raised as the prison watchdog says that actually there's a warning now of a national security risk of drones being used to deliver guns directly to the windows of the cells of prisoners in our higher security prisons. Absolutely extraordinary story. We'll talk about that as well. Or we're going to talk about all of it with you. And, of course, Sam Armstrong is my guest today as a commentator on the show. Thank you so much for joining us. We've got, I say, an awful lot to talk about. Let's just go straight into this reform poll. It's, a lot of reform people very, very excited about it. This is a YouGov poll for Sky News, came out at 10 o'clock last night, and we're looking at Labour on 25%. If there was an election tomorrow, that's what people asked, how would you vote? Reform just 1 point behind on 24. Tories another 2 points behind on 22. Lib Dems on 14. Greens on 8. But the really fascinating thing, I think, is the split in the country. We're very similar to America in this, left and right. If you add up the sort of the left votes and you add up the right votes, you're looking at 46% switch. I mean, not 52-48, our favourite ratio. What does this poll tell you?
Well, firstly, our electoral system means that split will reward whichever coalition, the left or the right, is more united at the time of the next election. It's literally that simple. Yeah. If the Labour Party has got the bulk of that left-wing vote, they will win. If either the Conservative or the Reform Party have got the overwhelming bulk of that right caucus, they will win.
Because it's not a situation where Tories have a load of MPs, Reform have a load of MPs, and then they could unite if they chose, and they would beat Labour. It's going to be either Tory or Reform.
And that's right.
And likely, therefore, Labour will win those seats.
Labour will slip in through the middle, despite being a smaller supported party at the time of the next election. And all of this points, in my mind, to the urgent need and the urgent requirement for some kind of arrangement to stop that. Otherwise, 10 years of Keir Starmer, and I really mean this, it will be a matter of, will the last person to leave Britain please switch the lights off? We will have Rachel Reeves running this economy for 10 years. We will have Ed Miliband running our energy system for 10 years.
Sorry, I'm just going to have to...
We will have Angela Rayner pulling the levers of power until the 2030s. And that is the inevitable electoral consequence of what we're seeing. And look, here's the thing, and I think this is what it really comes down to. Kemi Badenoch is a good, strong politician. There's a lot to be said about her, and there's a lot to be said about the...
You were a supporter of Robert Jenrick. You helped run his campaign for the leadership. But, yeah,
But there's a lot to be said about Kemi Badenoch. There's a lot of strengths to her, and there's a lot to be said about the Conservative Party.
Yeah.
Many, many people in this country just vote for the Conservative Party instinctively, reflexively, particularly older people who we know vote in elections. Nigel Farage is the most phenomenal politician of his generation. Reform are coming a long way, and their brand is in many ways better than the Conservatives. Neither of those parties, led by their current leaders, are going to break through dramatically one against the other. The Conservatives are not going to push Reform back down below 10%. They just aren't.
And Reform are not going to do a deal with the Tories.
But Reform are also not going to push the Conservatives back down under 10%. It's just not going to happen. So many people just vote instinctively for the Conservative Party, quite apart from the fact that a lot of people quite like Kemi Badenoch. And so the reality is we are going to go, absent some kind of arrangement, into the next election with that vote split painfully. And if Keir Starmer could hold together the coalition of public sector workers, train drivers, all the rest of it, the unemployed, that sent him into office in the first place, he is going to be stuck there. And this is the basic electoral reality that nobody seems to be ready to admit or accept. And if they don't, I think much in the same way as people could see what Labour was coming round the corner but said, oh, it won't be that bad, we can cope with it, much like now, they will regret it.
Well, there you are. You were told. What do you make of that? 0344 499 1000. A lot of people would have said, sorry, the Tories just don't deserve to be in. And until they get the memo about net zero, about wokedom, about the economy, then I'm afraid they don't deserve to be in. That's what a lot of people think. Certainly, Labour, again, I say it so often, but I knew they'd be bad. I thought the country probably needed a little dose, especially younger people. Let's have a little dose of your Labour Party. And I said that as somebody who grew up in a Labour family. I see that as someone who voted, who's voted Labour a number of times for Tony Blair. I voted for like 5 different political parties over my adult years. I'm not party, I have no allegiance to any individual party. But I knew they'd be bad. I genuinely, in my wildest dreams, I couldn't have imagined they would be this bad. And I never understood why people held a candle for Rachel Reeves. I always thought that Keir Starmer was a terrible communicator, but he was vaguely competent. And he got Sue Gray in. They had a plan. They knew what they were going to do. Yeah, they'd look after their own supporters, but they were going to, I thought, it will probably be boring, but it'll be steady as she goes. It's been so bad. Loads of drama, but the wrong kind of drama. The economy in the doldrums, looking like we could head into recession. They're going to try and take us back into the EU by hook or by crook. They're so dishonest. So dishonest and disrespectful of a democratic choice of people in this country. And they are utterly incompetent in every single area, whether it's communications, whether it's management, whether it's policy ideas, whether it's the economy. And you've got, Keir Starmer's incompetent. He can't do anything without an autocue. Rachel Reeves has got no feel for anything, no good judgment. Rachel Reeves is clearly utterly useless at her job. No way she survives the full 5 years.
Look, I've come to the solid view that Rachel Reeves has now reached the point where she is worse than Liz Truss. She has crashed the economy more so. Bond returns are even higher than they were under Liz Truss. The economy is flatlining, getting into bad growth. And strangely, bizarrely, I think Rachel Reeves is even less likeable than Liz Truss was. And look, that is saying something. The very nadir of Conservative government, the worst it got, and boy was it bad, make no excuses for it whatsoever, this government has managed to best it in 6 months.
Could someone tell the BBC about that? Because BBC, ITV and Sky, they just casually... they're obviously feeling the pressure, they're sort of vaguely mentioning it. But again, it's very sympathetic coverage, and it's, it's not as exciting as wildfires, is it? And how do you feel about the fire? That's the extraordinary thing in terms of the coverage they're getting. And they're still getting, the markets. Markets don't care about the coverage. The markets look at the reality. What do you make of... Let's put that image back up on the screen for those watching on YouTube. The Daily Star front page today, the meme, the joke about the lettuce, about Liz Truss, and would her premiership last longer than this lettuce would last with, this rotting cos lettuce. They've now put Rachel Reeves, they put her wig over a lettuce on the front page, saying, should we be popping out for another lettuce? When you're being mocked like that, and only 6 months in, the end is nigh, isn't it?
This government doesn't feel like it has much vitality. But look, here is the thing about this government. It didn't come in with masses of public support.
Yeah.
It just didn't.
The loveless landslide.
Keir Starmer got fewer votes than Jeremy Corbyn did in 2017. Yeah. A guy that literally called Hamas and Hezbollah his friends was more popular than our current Prime Minister.
Mind-blowing, isn't it? We've got so much I want to get to because we're going to be talking more about the Donald Trump and the special counsel report in America. But I do want to talk about Keir Starmer facing more and more pressure as both the Labour MP for Rochdale and the Labour MP for Rotherham. Rotherham, of course, Sarah Champion, someone who faced outrageous cries of racism and bigotry when she wanted to talk about the grooming gangs in her area. Paul Moore is a new MP for Rochdale. He's I would say, really good bloke. He's a really straight bloke. I used to work with him on the Evening Standard. He's a long-standing journalist. He's a good guy, and he clearly sees which way the wind's blowing. Do you think that Keir Starmer is basically going to have to back down and U-turn, and that there will be a national public inquiry? They'll call it something else, but it will be a national public inquiry into the grooming gangs. And do you think that will achieve anything?
Here's my prediction. Keir Starmer now can't back down, but he is going to have to give something away. And what I suspect is going to happen is that there will be a new national fund set up to fund local councils in order to conduct their own inquiries. And here's why that's a huge problem, because there is something unique about this pattern of offending that did take place in 60-odd different towns and cities across this country. We know that this pattern of offending is very different. Andrew Norfolk at the Times spent years and years proving this case, that there was this unique pattern about Pakistani men from certain towns in Pakistan even.
No one is saying that everyone from Pakistan is a child groomer. I mean, that's the thing. You can have this conversation with the nuance.
Absolutely not. And they were often working in similar jobs in the nighttime economy.
Yeah.
Like, we know that there is a pattern of particular type of men offending against a particular type of girl. We know there's a racial element. We know there was a hate crime element to it.
No, there wasn't, because it's the wrong way round.
But no,
you know that.
Nobody in power seems to want to get to the bottom of why.
Because it goes against every narrative in their heads about white bad, brown-skinned victim. I mean, that genuinely, I wrote about this in The Sun last week. This is genuinely, I got an Indeed from Elon Musk for the article. I'm worried about that.
I mean, are we honestly prepared to hold up white working-class girls as sort of sacrificial lambs in order to protect diversity?
Yeah, that's literally what has been done in this country for 20 years. No, that's literally that was the price that had to be paid, apparently, by the people, the good and the great who are in charge. I mean, this is the terrifying thing. We're going to talk more about that in the next half hour, and I do want to take a call. I'm going to get to the most important story of the day now, though. A pizza restaurant in Norwich that is so horrified by the number of customers who want to have pineapple on their pizzas that they said, yeah, OK, you can have a Hawaiian, you can have pineapple on your pizza, but we're going to charge you £100 for the privilege. What do you make of this story, Sam? I mean, the market speaks.
Yeah, I've never believed in banning things, but it ought to be a summary.
If you were going to have a ban.
It's a criminal offence punishable by many, many years in prison to have a pineapple on a pizza.
No,
I spent my entire youth going on holiday in Italy, eating great Italian food, still cook it all the time. It is disgusting, it is disgraceful, it is abhorrent, it is wrong,
you know what?
It is appalling.
I love all pizza, I have to say. They get bonus points on their bingo card every time I say, Pizza Express put me through university. I worked at loads of different Pizza Expresses, waitress all the time. We ate pizza for breakfast, lunch and dinner on 12-hour shifts, and I used to play games with the chefs. I would bring in a tin of pineapple chunks and put pineapple on my pepperoni pizza.
I'm
appalled. It's very nice.
I am appalled.
I don't like people being snotty about these things. It's like the Spaniards getting upset about, was it Jamie Oliver's paella or something? It's like, get a grip.
Pineapple is the one exception. It's pizza. Just put some
I mean, it's better in a pina colada.
Now
right, do you know what? Sam and I are going to fall out over this. Get your calls in, people. 0344. Most important. I mean, let's forget about, mass rape of girls or the falling of the economy or the future of the country. I mean, let's not worry about that. Let's worry about pineapple on pizza. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. I'm going to take a quick call right now. Dave is on the line. He's given us a call on 0344 499 1000. He is in Leeds. Dave, you wanted to get in touch about that poll for reform, putting them just 1 point behind Labour.
Yes, good morning,
Good morning, my love.
Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year. Are we still doing that on the 14th?
Just about. I'll let you know a bit later in the year. I'm still feeling.
In October. Happy New Year.
Not too bad at the moment. Yes, I just want to say I've been a big supporter of Farage and reform. Indeed, I've been a member for some time, but I've cancelled my membership over the Charlie Mullins saga and Mullins joining the party. I cannot stomach that fact.
Well, Charlie Mullins was on the Mike's show just a few moments ago. Now, I mean, Nigel Farage has urged Charlie Mullins, obviously of Pimlico Plumbers, to become a candidate. But Charlie Mullins, he's expressed an interest in standing. Why are you so opposed to him?
I would think he will do enormous damage if he stands as a candidate for reform. His views during COVID were absolutely abhorrent. I'd describe him as a COVID fascist.
He was. He
wanted us locked up in our homes. He wanted people who didn't have jobs not to be allowed to go out of their homes.
Yeah, he did.
Not to have a job, not to be allowed to travel. The list goes on and on. I found his views absolutely appalling. And if he's going to stand as a reform candidate, I think people need to wake up and smell the coffee about reform a little bit more.
Do you know what? That is.
He will do a lot of damage.
Genuinely, that is a genuine concern. I mean, for me, people's views on the lockdown and people's views on freedom of speech, but also he's a massive, not a Remainer, he's a massive Ramona. Well, maybe in the next few days I'll get Charlie on my show and put a lot of that to him. Really good point, Dave. Thank you very much indeed. And again, the proof is in the pudding, and we'll see with candidates who were chosen. Lots more to talk about. We're going to take a quick break. Then we're going to be talking to Greg Spencer of Republicans Overseas UK about what the US Special Counsel has had to say. This is Jack Smith in his new report, basically just days ahead of Donald Trump becoming President of the United States once again, basically saying, I could have got a guilty verdict when it comes to him basically trying to overturn the 2020 presidential election. That's up next. Stay tuned. This is Talk.
simply do not have the capacity for a massive expansion in AI at the moment. I mean, you take West London, for example, so many data centres being constructed there in recent years, and they've consumed so much of the capacity of the grid that housing developers have been told, well, sorry, that there's just no grid capacity for you to build new homes and won't be till 2035. Right.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense at 11:22. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. Sam Armstrong's still with me. Interesting to get his thoughts. We've already touched on them a bit earlier about where we are with Donald Trump. We are just days away from his inauguration in Washington next Monday afternoon, UK time. But today we've seen an extraordinary report out from the US Special Counsel, Jack Smith, in which he has said that if it wasn't for the fact that Donald Trump was president-elect, he would have been able to get a guilty verdict on charges basically that he had engaged in an unprecedented criminal effort, he says, to overturn his 2020 election defeat. Well, let's talk about this with Greg Swenson. He's the chairman of Republicans Overseas UK and joins us now. A very good morning to you, Greg.
Good morning, Julia. Great to be here.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. This report, the timing of this report, very damning. This will not have gone down well with Donald Trump. But what exactly is this special counsel saying? Who appointed him, and is he a political appointee, and what is he arguing?
Yeah, he's very much a political appointee, and he's having a sore loser moment where he's saying, okay, I dropped the case because the case was, had very little merit. Same with the documents case, same with most of the indictments, or all. And yet he's saying, I could have beat him. This guy was appointed by Merrick Garland, who's the attorney general, very political, very left-leaning attorney general. And so it just kind of points to the whole charade of this. So it was a last-minute stunt. He resigned officially last week, Jack Smith. And so this was just kind of his final
swan song. Well,
it's shameless, absolutely shameless.
Look, there's no doubt at all. Look, I've always argued that I think that what Donald Trump did was actually basically an affront to democracy. Whether it was criminal or not, it was an affront to democracy. It made him unfit for public office. I also think that the criminal charges against him largely were politically inspired. The timing of them was very clear. It was only when he was making a comeback. They thought he'd been and gone, didn't have to do that. So I think it's possible to hold both these ideas in your head at the same time. And also that I don't think Donald Trump is a desirable person to have in the Oval Office, but he's a damn sight better than Kamala Harris. And I'd said before the election, I would rather he won than she did. I think he'll do some very good and hopeful things in various areas.
Sure.
But Jack Smith said that Donald Trump, in his words, he says, inspired his supporters to commit acts of physical violence, and that there would have been enough evidence for a jury to convict him. He said in the January 6th riots, he knowingly spread a false narrative about fraud in the 2020 election. He said the charges could be justified against Trump's co-conspirators, but reached no final conclusions. And he says, indeed, but for Mr. Trump's election and imminent return to the presidency, the office assessed that the admissible evidence was sufficient to obtain and sustain a conviction at trial. Now, we know we've had the sentencing. We had the sentencing in the Stormy Daniels hush money case. Look, he doesn't have presidential immunity for that. It was quite right that he should have been sentenced. Yeah. He wasn't going to be sent to prison. We knew he wouldn't. No one. It would have been outrageous.
It was a bookkeeping.
It was a bookkeeping.
It wasn't hush money. Okay. Hush money is perfectly legal. Yeah.
But you're allowed to pay porn stars.
Yeah, non-disclosure. Yeah, non-disclosures.
But here's the thing:
completely kosher.
We had evidence that was given to various, congressional inquiries about what happened on January the 6th, the insurrection, the riots, the uprising, whatever we're going to call it. Yeah. Even from close Trump allies, family members and others under oath, saying, they were imploring Donald Trump to stop what was going on. When they saw the violence, they were imploring him to stop it, and he chose not to for hours on end. Close aides and even family members have said that. What he did, whether it was criminal or not, was certainly wrong. Wasn't it?
Right. Mistakes for sure.
But there wasn't a mistake. He knew what he was doing.
But Julia, I noticed in the statement that you read, you forgot to mention that he encouraged the people to peacefully and patriotically, exercise their First Amendment rights. So, this was a one-sided prosecution, and prosecutors.
But wait a second, but Greg.
Yeah, let me finish.
He's he's encouraging people to be peaceful and respectful. At the point when they're not, when you can see people rioting and storming the live on television, and he was watching it live on television, and we know that people were with him. At that point, when you see that they're not peaceful, you would step up and say something if you were right.
No doubt. I don't think we're trying to relitigate Jan 6th. It was a horrible moment, and I think the president made mistakes. But we're talking about is this special prosecutor, Jack Smith, releasing this days before the inauguration, when this statement, this report, has been in the DOJ's hands since November, December. So they sat on it and waited to release it right now. It's just sore loser syndrome. Jack Smith is one of the most losing Department of Justice prosecutors, perhaps of all time. And then this comes at the same, like with an interesting backdrop after the Hunter Biden after the Joe Biden pardoning Hunter, he disparaged those special prosecutors, in David Weiss specifically. And so David Weiss has released a statement that said, essentially Biden is undermining the very foundation of the American justice system. It's probably a good moment to stop, trying to indict your political opponents because you disagree with them. And that's what happened with all these indictments. There might have been some merit to it, but surely not enough to convict, which is why he dropped the case. And then he says, Monday morning quarterbacking, I could have got him. I really could have.
But they dropped the case because he's going to have presidential immunity. You know that as well as I do. But bearing in mind,
major challenges to this case.
Look, Donald Trump is the man who campaigned in 2016 about Hillary Clinton, lock her up. The Democrats were appalling in the way they behaved after his victory in 2016, claiming it was all Russian collusion. Look, a load of abject lies on it. I mean, frankly, you're all as bad as each other, the Democrats and the Republicans, on both those fronts. But this is incredibly damaging to what is supposed to be the world's leading democracy. I mean, I don't think America is a proper democracy anymore because of the politicization of the justice system, the big money, and the way that the way that these things are decided now. It seems to me that your home country is no longer sort of a beacon of light for democracy in a way that it should be.
It will be. There's some mistakes. It's a speed bump. And there'll be some corrections to it. I really hope there are. I mean, you notice Trump did not prosecute Hillary Clinton. I know he did a little campaign rally excitement and saying lock her up. That was kind of a pushback. But I think it really was weaponized after President Trump announced he was running again. Recall, Julia, this case, the Jack Smith case, and all of the other ones, there was no mention of them until he announced he was running for president. So clearly, this was a deliberate attempt to prevent him from running for president. Whereas for 3 years, they sat on everything and said, no blood, no foul. I mean,
no, there's no question at all. The timing was political. Can I just ask you, though, I mean, looking ahead to the election cycle starts again, even before Inauguration Day, to the next presidential election. A lot of talk for the last few years of Gavin Newsom, the Democrat governor of California, as a potential runner. My God, no one loves Gavin Newsom as much as Gavin Newsom loves Gavin Newsom, that's for sure. Do you think that what's been happening with the Californian fires, and it's ongoing, we've got near hurricane level winds expected over the next couple of days. I mean, 100,000 people on evacuation orders, so many homes burnt down, people have died. But do you think that actually what's happened to the California fires, the abject failure across the board in California on so many fronts, do you think that that's put paid to Gavin Newsom's chances?
I do. I mean, look, politicians have come back from worse. And I think President Trump's probably a good example of that. But this one is going to be really difficult because it's his policies that he has endorsed, and he has been supported by the same climate lunatics that have wrecked California, not just with the water supply, but more importantly, with the opposition to clearing excess forest and excess brush. I mean, not only were people doing that in California, the sane governments, the proper governments, for 150 years, the Indian tribes, Native Americans or indigenous people of America tribes, they were doing that centuries ago. It's common sense, and they've lost all sense of common sense. I think he's buried. I think he's done.
I was going to say, Greg, climate change. Greg Swenson, Chairman of Republicans Overseas UK, thank you very much indeed for that. Sam Armstrong, I know you're listening to all of that. You follow American politics very closely too. What do you make of Donald Trump and indeed, what's been going on with the California fires?
Well, I think this time next week we are going to be seeing a very, very, very different America. And look,
executive orders on the first day are going to be plentiful, aren't they?
It's going to be bumpy, it's going to be drama-fueled, and it is going to be, in my view, a good thing overall. And I'll tell you why it's a good thing in particular.
I agree with you.
Because actually, we are in some ways downstream from American politics. Many of the ideas that first seeded there, cancel culture in universities, started at American university campuses, and it came here afterwards. And likewise, what Trump is doing, what Trump is going to do, is going to make its way over here. And look, we only need to look at what the government is doing, for example, on Chagos, the Chagos Alliance, where it's rushing the deal through to pay Mauritius to take our sovereign territory off us. It's going to be paying £9 billion at a time when there is no money left in the kitty. Why? Because it has to do it before Donald Trump. There's going to be a new sheriff in town next week, and boy, do we need him.
Again, I agreed on all of that. That I have to say. I mean, I'm really hoping that, because we're the ones who are going to be stuck with this lunatic lot in Labour for the next 4.5 years, while the rest of the world hopefully gets a little bit saner. Deep sighs, everyone. Don't worry, we're going to be by your side to hold your hand through the abject madness. 11:33 is the time. Up next, we are going to be talking about more threats to freedom of speech. Of course, there are, even it's now in the pub, whether or not we are going to see any change on that policy on grooming gangs from Keir Starmer, because basically, as far as I can tell, Labour and the Tories for many years are out to protect them. This is Talk. We are the home of common sense.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very good morning to you. Thank you very much indeed for joining me. And also, for your calls, we're going to get some more calls. Hope you try and squeeze another one in, at least in the next half hour. 0344 499 1000. In particular, your reaction to that poll from YouGov that puts Reform just 1 percentage point behind Labour and 2 ahead of the Tories. If there were an election tomorrow, people were asked, how would you vote? Do you think Nigel Farage could win the next election? Tell us why you think he would, could, might. Maybe you think he should or shouldn't. Love to hear your thoughts. As I say, the number to call 0344 499 1000. We've also got lots of text messages I'm going to get to as well in the next half hour. First up, though, let's talk about, well, more attacks on freedom of speech. I mean, another day, another attack on freedom of speech. What would you expect? This time, it's freedom of speech in the pub, because pubs could be forced to ban customers from speaking about what are regarded by, well, you know, the offendertrons as contentious views like politics, religion, or, you know, basic biological facts like men can't become women and women can't become men, over fears that they could fall foul of Labour's workers' rights reforms, which require bosses to protect their blue-haired, flimsy, hopeless, pronoun-announcing workers from hearing things they don't agree with and find triggering. Let's talk about this with Rafe Haydel-Manku, commentator at the New Cultural Forum, who I'm sure, Rafe, I'm sure you, like me, have offended 1 million people in pubs over the years and are happy to carry on doing so.
Yes, I've seen more than a few raised eyebrows after one of my jokes, I have to say.
Excellent. Don't tell it on air, I'll get sacked.
But, you know, we're laughing about it, but actually this is really sinister and deeply insidious stuff. And it doesn't just affect, you know, that casual chat and banter in the pubs. It affects organisations like mine, the New Culture Forum, like the Free Speech Union, because, you know, historically pubs have always been political. Let's just remember that, you know. They've been hotbeds for radical and subversive politics, the place for philosophers and revolutionaries and conspirators and others to meet and discuss. And that carries on today for many organisations. We at the New Culture Forum have a new thing called NCF Locals. We've established 30 branches across the country for local people, many of whom are fans of yours and watch Talk all the time, to get together in a safe space where they can talk about things they can't talk about with their family, with their co-workers or anywhere else. And they really appreciate having these places. And we use pub function rooms to have that.
And I know a lot of, you know, what's the awful phrase, gender-critical women, i.e. people who understand basic biological sex and science. You know, the amount of times that they're told, oh, no, you can't, you're transphobic, you can't have a meeting in our pub. You know, there's rooms that you hire for 30 quid to have a meeting. But this isn't even about that. I mean, which is appalling enough. This is about, you know, sitting in the pub at a table, having a conversation, bartender comes over to collect your glasses and overhears you say, yes, but of course, you know, trans women aren't women, they're men, they're biological men. That person could sue their employer, and therefore the employer, well, the onus would be on him or her, whatever their pronouns say, them, they, to ban that customer. And I worked in pubs. You know, banter is kind of one of the reasons people go to the pub. This is going to kill off. I mean, you know, you've got all the rules in pubs anyway. We had the queuing system and the one-way system to the loo during COVID. We've got, you know, the smoking ban. We've got all these. The cost of a pint and a glass of wine, absolutely astronomical anyway. If they do this, and landlords are terrified that they are going to be sued for hundreds of thousands of pounds by some blue-haired barmaid, I'm sorry, that's the end of the pub. It's over.
Yeah, well, this is a perfect thing for the Labour Party, of course, because we know that they hate free speech and they hate the pub, right? So they get
and they hate fun.
And they hate fun, right? They tried to ban smoking in pub gardens. We've had a huge rise in alcohol duty. Pubs are in crisis. Thousands are closing. And, you know, the pub is a very symbol of liberty, of freedom, and of Britishness. And so, of course, it's no surprise that Labour wants to attack it. And by attacking the pub, they're attacking the British people and the idea of liberty, because the pub is the public house. So it's only one step removed from our private house. You know, for hundreds of years, our houses were so cramped and tiny, we couldn't socialise. So the pub at the end of your street was an extension of our own living rooms. It's where we could gather and talk freely.
I think so many people forget, it's public house. It's where you could talk and you could mix freely. I have a funny feeling that many in Labour view, you know, everyone in the pub as basically just a horrible racist, xenophobic bigot. Those people, you know, who vote Reform or voted for Brexit and they all had horrible views and we don't want to hear them. And if we don't hear them, then it's okay. But again, this is all part of the crackdown on freedom of speech, which is this idea that if people can't say it, they can't write it, then they won't think it, which is literally the opposite of what actually happens whenever freedom of speech is curtailed. It's much better if people do have views. Look, I've been in a pub where someone says, I said, excuse me, you know, if someone's using horrible language about gay people or black people or something, I would absolutely say, hey, you know, I don't speak like that. And so, you know, I don't want to have to hear your horrible views, you know. But, hey, people are entitled to hold horrible views. Now, there's a difference between, like, you know, customers saying that and a landlord would be entitled to say, look, I don't want people upsetting my other customers. But that used to be when someone said something, they were like shouting and swearing, or they were aggressive, or they were imposing themselves on other people. And landlords can be very strict about that, to keep the atmosphere going in their pubs. But that's very different from this law. This law is about even people having a quiet conversation between two people.
I think this is going to become a big issue for the courts here, because they're going to have a big kerfuffle now about freedom of religion, for example.
Yeah.
So if you are a religious person and you're having a religious or philosophical discussion, and you have, those are protected characteristics, the right to express yourself on those levels, and someone clearing glasses objects to your traditional religious view on women, for example, or on homosexuals, well, who becomes top trumps in that case, Identity politics versus freedom of religion. And I think under the Equalities Act, the courts would come down, I'm pretty sure, on freedom of religion being paramount.
Well, only certain religions. Only certain religions. You know the rules, Ray.
You're not likely to get many religious Muslims in a pub, I suspect.
There is that. There is that, absolutely. But it is, again, and people joke about these things, but it's actually very, very serious. Rafe Haydel-Mankiw, commentator at the New Cultural Forum, thank you very much, dear. I would love to spend an evening in the pub with you. I have to say, it's been very, very good fun. Sam Armstrong, look, you've been involved with the Free Speech Union from the start. This is a very, very big issue that you've helped to fight on. And we know there are cases all the time. But again, employers, people are still being sacked. They're being disciplined for saying, quietly, minding their own business, or an email exchange, someone that, basic biological sex is real and things like that. People are still being sacked. These are employers who, they've got HR departments who you expect would know what the law is, and the Meyer Forstatter case and the appeal court showing this was a philosophical belief. I mean, the idea that it's a protected philosophical belief to know facts about biological sex is absurd in itself, but nevertheless protected view. The average pub landlord or landlady can't be expected to know this stuff.
Well, they're going to be required by law to do so. And if you speak out, if you commit wrongthink, you are going to not only be kicked out of your job, not only be cancelled online, but you're going to be barred from your local boozer. That is the inevitable effect of this legislation.
We've seen people barred from football matches. But this is it. I mean, so much of this, again, the Tories absolutely awful on this. I mean, they've really, really let the country down on this. They could have had all these, even the law that's being challenged by the Free Speech Union, which has been overturned by the Education Secretary in terms of trying to protect some level of freedom of speech on university campuses in England only, certainly not in Scotland or in Wales. But, if that had been enacted sooner, there wouldn't be an issue with it. It is extraordinary how much the Tories have failed on this. But a lot of people thought, well, Labour get in, that'll be the end of the culture wars. They are doubling down on this stuff.
It appears that is what they're actually getting most excited about doing.
Totally.
This is what really gets them up in the morning. Now, I have no doubt that in number 10 there's some nervousness about this, because they know how badly it's playing. And just look at the pubs. I mean, pubs...
Keir Starmer goes to his local pub in Islington, apparently.
Well, but between this, the national insurance rises... the
winter fuel...
but also banning smoking in pub gardens... Pubs are going to go out of business by their thousands in this country. These are precious community assets. They're something that everybody pretty much in this country values, respects, wants to preserve. And it cannot be good politics. And you've got to think that number 10 will at some point rein all of this in.
That said, you've got to remember, if it was up to Labour, we'd still be in lockdown and all the pubs would still be closed. I mean, I'm sorry, it would be that they would never have reopened, because the stats would have always said when you reopen, well, then we're all going to die. Which does bring me on, because I do want to talk briefly about the COVID inquiry. Module 4 has begun this morning. This is looking at vaccines and vaccine harms. Now, in the wake of, again, I don't have any faith at all the COVID inquiry is going to get to the bottom of anything. The answer is always going to be, we should have locked down sooner. And apparently they're absolutely convinced that everyone who was 95 would have lived forever if there hadn't been a COVID pandemic. I'm sorry to break everyone. People did die before 2020. I know this is something lots of people had to learn, but they do need to learn it. But interesting, after Mark Zuckerberg of Meta and Facebook, after his interview with Joe Rogan, where he's trying to be like, he's suddenly now a free speech advocate, having been one of the worst offenders when it came to censorship on Facebook. And by the way, long before this was demanded from Joe Biden and his administration, basically saying like, we were forced to censor anything that would suggest there were vaccine harms. We know there are vaccine harms from COVID. We know there are vaccine harms from every vaccine, even ones that actually do rather more good than the COVID vaccine does for the vast majority of the population. And yet the censorship of that. Do you think we're ever going to get to the bottom of this, and especially the vaccine mandates and vaccines being forced on children as well, recommended to children, when there was not only no evidence for it, there was evidence against giving children the vaccine?
No. And do you know exactly how we can tell? this inquiry is run by a morass, a vast chunk at our expense of lawyers. Yeah. What on earth are lawyers going to do to get to the bottom of this thing? These are detective work that needs to be done. Yeah. There's some real judgments that needs to be undertaken by proper statisticians that can really get to the bottom. Instead, what we're going to see is exactly what we always see with these stupid inquiries, which is these rather flippant questions being asked back and forth that never get to the bottom of anything. They go through vast amounts of documents sending back and forth. They cost hundreds of millions of quid and don't tell us anything that we didn't know in the first place.
No, they're going to say we should have locked down sooner. I know that's all they're going to say. And there were some hurty WhatsApps about Boris Johnson. Madness. I'm going to squeeze in a quick call on 0344 499 1000 on pubs. Robert's on the line in Hertfordshire. Hello, Robert. What do you want to say?
Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
Barely morning. Good morning. This is so sinister, and it's the beginning of Marxism stopping people from congregating. That's what it is.
That's what they did. It's a deliberate policy. Don't let people exchange ideas or free thoughts.
Or even get together. And if it wasn't, the government was going to bring out a blasphemy law, but let's kick that into touch with the Grooming gang. So that's not going to happen now.
I don't know. I still think they'll try and do it. There's already a de facto blasphemy law, but it only applies to one religion, Islam.
Yeah.
Because I can't criticise Islam in the things that I would want to say, because I would have my head cut off and I'd be in hiding for the rest of my life. That's the reality.
Well, yeah. We're sort of slightly going off the subject, but if this would have happened in the summer, there would have been riots. I'll tell you that now.
Well,
if this would have happened, it's only the weather stopping the people going to the streets.
Well, or people being aware of it. I think a lot of people, again, because it's not, we need only some stories sort of reach people. A lot of people just unaware, but, they'll be aware when they're not allowed to even make a naughty joke in the pub. I thought that's why people went to the pub. Robert, thank you for that. Look, it smacks of Marxism. He's right. And it's the fun police. It's the fun auditors. That's what it is. 11:49 is the time. Up next, we are going to talk about whether or not Keir Starmer is likely to U-turn on his plan not to have a full public national inquiry into the grooming gangs, and also how on earth are drones sending in contraband to prisons? And it could be guns next. This is Talk Home of Common Sense.
Sleepy Joe Biden proved to everyone that he has what it takes to be president. So now we have a new victim to defeat, Kamala Harris, L-Y-I-N apostle. Take a look at what happened. In Springfield, they're eating the dogs. The people that came in, they're eating the cats. Many people have told me that God spared my life for a reason.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the home of common sense. 11:52 is the time. Sam Armstrong's still with me. Get his thoughts on what our next guest has to say. Two big crime stories to talk about with Mike Neville, former Metropolitan Police Detective Chief Inspector. Very good morning to you, Mike.
Morning, Julia.
Lovely to talk to you. First of all, I want to talk about the grooming gangs and, well, an awful lot of pressure now coming on the Prime Minister to U-turn on his plan not to hold a national public inquiry where people give evidence under oath about the grooming gangs and what happened, who allowed it, who turned a blind eye, who covered it up, and try and get some, some answers, join the dots, as Kemi Badenoch said. But we've had the MP, the Labour MP for Rotherham, that's Sarah Champion, one of the people who was one of the sort of whistleblowers on this issue in Rotherham. She's gone back on what she said last week. She was backing the Prime Minister. Now she says, no, sorry, I've spoken to victims. We need to have an inquiry. The new Labour MP for Rochdale, also an area where there's been a huge problem with grooming gangs, Paul Waugh, he said he thinks there should be inquiry if that's what the victims want. Do you think the pressure inevitably is going to mount and Keir Starmer's going to have to U-turn?
I can only hope so, because there's such wickedness here. The people who are responsible for this, left the police or the social services or the council with knighthoods and OBEs and MBEs. So those people should have those honours stripped away. And in the worst cases, they should be put in prison. I mean, the Labour Party is guilty of hypocrisy here. If you look at the wicked murder of Stephen Lawrence. So Stephen Lawrence was the victim of a racist attack which resulted in his murder, and there was alleged police failings. And so the Labour Party really pressed for a massive inquiry which resulted in all sorts of systematic changes in the police. If we look here, we have racist rapes and murders against young girls where there's allegedly lots of police failings. What's the difference? The difference is there are thousands of people involved in this crime, and of course the difference is in two-tier Britain, if you're white, you're not treated as some kind of victim by the left if you were from an ethnic minority, and that is in this country that is completely unacceptable. Yeah,
I mean, the white privilege that these white working class girls, many of whom were in care, have got, as they were being plied with drugs and alcohol and sodomised by men old enough to be their fathers and grandfathers above a kebab shop in Rotherham or Rochdale or Telford or Oxford or any of the other, 45 plus other cities where this was happening. Their white privilege just, shines through, does it not, Mike?
It's absolutely scandalous. I've said this before. I come from a council house in Bolton. If somebody can tell me where the white privilege was hidden there, I'll go back and get it. Yeah. But it's an absolute scandal that these girls have been treated like this and that those covered it up. And we know that there's official documents which will show that people have said basically that celebrating diversity or maintaining multiculturalism is more important.
Community cohesion, Mike. Community cohesion.
Oh, no, sorry. So I've got to keep up with the programme. So community cohesion and all these things. So you have a situation where senior police officers are almost pleading with unappointed, unelected Pakistani elders who dictate. But we saw this after the riots in Southport. We saw in Birmingham and places that the police negotiating with, like I say, unelected, unappointed elders who then dictate to the police what they can and can't do. And that's unacceptable.
And we see it again and again. It is extraordinary. I think Keir Starmer's massively out of touch on this issue. And there's no particular reason why, if there was an inquiry, we're told it has to take 7 years. Well, it doesn't need to take that long. You can make it much shorter and clearer and more focused than that. But also, it doesn't mean that police investigations can't continue at the same time.
Of course. So all these things could be done in parallel, but this scandal is so deep. Yeah. It covers so many different parts of the country. And I said last night on Kevin O'Sullivan's show, this isn't just a UK problem. No. This is a Western European problem. The liberal elites have allowed this to go on. Yep. I was in Germany after the sex attacks in Cologne. The government tried to cover it up. Well, the ones that didn't happen. Jess Phillips, now Home Office Minister, said they never happened. Nothing worse than Broad Street on an average Saturday night. And it's the same in Sweden, the same attempts by the government in Sweden to cover it up. And it'll be the same in France and Belgium. You have a liberal elite who rule Western Europe who've decided that multiculturalism is the way forward. And if this means that little girls have got to be raped and murdered, then such is life. We'll crack on with it. And this is a scandal. It is so extraordinary, isn't it? We're not going to let it go away. Mike, I also just finally want to touch on a Prisons Watchdog report. The Chief Inspector of Prisons, Charlie Taylor, he's been warning about drones being used to get contraband into prison cells, being flown literally to the prison cell window. They're cutting a hole in their window. The prison, they're able to get the stuff from the drones. It was drugs, it was contraband, it was money, it was cigarettes. Now they're worried it's now a security risk because they're able to fly in weapons, even guns. How concerned are you about this? Really concerned. I mean, last year there was over 200 reports of drones flying near prisons. That's the one they know of. Luckily, what they know, and what we know is that these drones can carry about 3 pounds in a sort of a bag of sugar, but that's going to get more and more in the future. They're looking at, could it carry a person, like a James Bond style, rescue? But of course, 3 pounds could carry 3 pounds weight could be a knife, a gun. And so the prisons have got to look at, before they were secured in doors and windows from the sides, now they've got to look at above. They've got to have these nets across, they've got to have proper CCTV, and they've got to have more drone detection devices. Because one thing's sure, Julia, is that the authorities are always slow. Criminals are always much quicker to use technology to their own benefit. They don't have risk assessments, they don't have data protection, they just crack on and use them. Absolutely. And again, I always think that if you're not actually able to keep, drugs and guns and God knows what out of prison, then what hope for the rest of us out in civil life? Mike Neville, former Met Police DCI, thank you so much for that. Sam Armstrong, I mean, it is extraordinary, isn't it? Yeah, I just imagine the consequences. And we know that it can be done very, very easily, of a gun getting into a prison estate. Many of these prisons are far outside of cities now. We build many of them. Who'd be a prison officer now? If a prisoner gets a gun into a prison, he will be able to literally waltz out the door with a gun, committing heinous violence on our streets, and the chances of them being caught quickly, low. Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I mean, unless they write a hurty tweet, obviously, in which case, obviously, the police will be turning up very, very quickly. Anyway, more from Sam Armstrong coming up. Up next, going to be talking more about that poll that put Reform just 1 point behind Labour. We're going to be asking the chairman of Reform UK, Zia Youssef, whether they really could get into number 10 next time round. That's up next. Don't forget your calls. This is Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very good afternoon to you. Welcome back to the show. This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Thank you so much for your company, whether you are listening on DAB+ radio or on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube, on your connected device. As I say, always great to have your company. Coming up in this hour, we're going to be talking more about this major new YouGov poll, putting Reform UK just 1 percentage point behind Labour and ahead of the Tories. What does that mean for leader Nigel Farage's chances of winning the next election? We'll put that to the chairman of Reform UK, Zia Yousaf, in just a couple of moments. Also, the US President Joe Biden says that Israel and Hamas are on the brink of signing a ceasefire deal that would release hostages and surge aid into Gaza. That's what Joe Biden had to say in his final foreign policy address as the US President. Of course, it will also see the release of 1,000 Hamas terrorists and criminals back into freedom. So concerns there. We'll talk about that coming up. Also, civil service middle management, this is not going to surprise you at all, has doubled in the past decade as officials are over-promoted to get round a pay squeeze. Uncontrolled promotions mean the cost of the civil service is now £2 billion annually. That's just sort of the proper civil service, not other public sector jobs. £2 billion. Wonder what they actually do, since most of them aren't actually in the office most of the time. Anyway, this is Talk. We are the home of common sense. Do want to get your calls in. Let's get some more calls on the show before we finish the top of the hour. Reform UK now only 1 percentage point behind Labour, ahead of the Tories by 2 points in a new YouGov poll asking how would you vote if there was an election tomorrow. How significant do you think this is? Could Nigel Farage win the next general election? Would you want him to win the next general election? Love to hear your thoughts. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. Get in touch also on text on 87222. You can send us a message on X at talkTV. Calls are charged altogether now at a national rate. Text costs £1, standard network rate message. Also, love to hear your thoughts on all of the other big stories we've been talking about, including pubs and freedom of speech, and indeed Keir Starmer having to shore up Rachel Reeves, but I think not very well in her job as Chancellor. Still joining me, I'm delighted to say, is commentator Sam Armstrong. Just before we go to Zia Yousaf, just your thoughts again for those people who've just tuned in about this reform poll and how significant it is, given that we've kind of got the situation where the country is split pretty much half-half, 47 versus 46% in terms of the main-ish parties, where you put Labour, Lib Dems and Greens on one side, Reform and the Tories on the other, that left-right split, very reminiscent of the Democrats and the Republicans in America. But your concern is, as who's a Conservative, I think, member and supporter, is, of course, that if Reform and Conservatives split their votes, the right-wing vote, that sees not just a Labour government this time round, but next time round too.
Yeah, and I say this as someone who literally wouldn't care if we had a Reform government or a Conservative government. I think both of them would actually be much better than what we've got. But here are the fundamental problems. You've got 45% of the public on one side, 45% of the public on the other. The coalition, the faction that is less split, in which one party is the dominant party and the others are sort of smaller, will win the next election. And what Reform or the Conservatives will have to do, if they are not prepared to come to some kind of arrangement, is one of them has to squeeze the other to less than 10%. I don't think that Kemi Badenoch has a plan to get Reform's vote back down under that level. I just don't think it's going to happen. But on the other hand,
I'm not sure insulting Reform is going to help.
I don't think Reform can get Tory votes that low either. And I'll tell you for why. In large part because so many voters just reflexively vote Conservative in this country. You can't do it. And the reality of that will be is you'll have the Tories on the high 20s, Reform on the high 20s going into the election, Labour on 35%, and the result will be either a Labour majority again, or even worse, possibly a coalition of chaos between Labour, the SNP, the Lib Dems, the Greens. It could get even worse.
I mean, God, we were having a nice day. Why'd you have to suggest? Don't give them ideas. Right, well, let's talk about all of this with Zia Yousaf. He's chairman of Reform UK and joins us once again. A very good afternoon, she's here.
Good afternoon.
Thanks for joining us. Well, I suppose just initially your reaction when you saw that poll at 10 o'clock last night showing Labour on 25 percentage points. If, 25% of people say they would vote Labour if there was a general election tomorrow. Reform on 24, just 1 point behind. Tories languishing in third place at 22 points. Lib Dems back in 14% and Greens at 8%. What was your reaction when you heard that news?
My reaction was the same as millions of people across the country, which was obviously delighted. People in this country can now see for the first time in around a century the stranglehold that the two old parties have had on British politics is finally breaking in real time. We're seeing history being made. I will say about this YouGov poll, it's not an outlier. I mean, Reform has been making new highs with pretty much every polling company. They all have slightly different methodology. Obviously, YouGov have a very strong reputation, and it is the first voting intention poll they have done since the general election. I will just respond to your guest's comments a moment ago. If you just look at the numbers, these are just objective facts. If Reform is sitting on 24 to 25%, and 31% is what a party needs under the first past the post system in order to have a majority and to form a government, then all we actually really need to do from here is win 3 percentage points from Labour and the Conservatives. Nobody needs, it's simply not true that one of those parties has to go down to 10%. And if you look at the progress Reform has made since the general election, in those 7 months, almost all of the poll gains have actually come from Labour, not from the Conservatives. It's my view, based on what I'm seeing, and we do a lot of our own private polling, and obviously we speak to thousands of people at the doorstep all the time at Reform. We're winning support from Labour, we're winning support from the Tories, we're winning support from people who've never voted before, never engaged before. We did a training event. We've launched a centre of excellence for our council candidates, and over half of the room, we had about 150 people there, had never engaged meaningfully in the political system before. So there's something really powerful happening in Britain, and I think it's brilliant.
Well, I mean, there's the thing. I mean, there is an argument about whether one of those parties has to go down, one has to go up. But the reality is there is a concern about the fact that the right's vote is split in a way that the left vote isn't, and it's how those votes are distributed as well, isn't it? Because it completely depends whether lots of votes are being piled up in one particular seat or spread around. The Lib Dems for years, they were doing perfectly well in the polls, but their votes were kind of spread sort of evenly around the country, well, fairly evenly, and they never quite made it. And then they got to the point where they were doing very well in some London seats, outer the home counties, and particularly in the southwest, and then they started building on that. Reform doing very well in particular areas, a lot of coastal towns, a lot of the Midlands and the north, and in Essex doing well. But it's where those seats those votes are being piled up. And one of the issues you've got is you're second in roughly 100 seats around the country. I think 89 of those, am I right in thinking, are Labour seats. But you're a long way behind in a lot of those seats by 20 percentage points or more. So Labour could fall 10 points and you could go, but you could still not win those seats. There's a very big difference between doing well in an opinion poll and actually translating that into bums on those green benches in the House of Commons. And you know that. That's part of your job as chairman of the party, to try and orchestrate that.
Correct. I do know that because it's what I spend most of my woken hours working on and thinking about with Nigel. And that's actually what makes me even more bullish, actually, than most people, because I can see the majority of what we've been working on at Reform in terms of building our ground campaign capabilities can't yet be seen. You're going to start to see that firstly in May, depending on how many elections happen. Obviously, the Tories and Labour have colluded appallingly to rob millions of British people, English people in particular, from their democratic right to boot out these awful councillors. But let me also say one other thing. Julia, those points, when people say, oh, you're second behind Labour in 90 seats, that's based on data that is 7 months old. In that general election, we won 14.1% of the vote. In the YouGov poll yesterday, we're winning between 24 and 25%. So that is out of date. Yeah. And when you look at the MRP polls, which MRP, for those who don't know, are the most sophisticated way to be able to work out how many seats would be won by a party. Those are consistently now showing us winning somewhere between 120 and 140 seats. In the coming weeks, you will see us consistently demonstrating we would win more seats in the House of Commons than the Conservative Party if a general election were to be held today. And by the way, sadly, we are still years away from a general election. As much as I would love for there to be another general election, how many of the leaders did the Tories get through? They got through about one a year and never called a general. If Starmer is deposed, it'll be someone like Angela Rayner or Lammy, who ends up getting in.
Seriously, people keep saying things. When I say things can't get much worse, oh my God, they really, really could.
But sometimes things do need to get worse before they can get better, Julia. And what I will say is that is what Reform are offering. You know, this is not a protest vote. Anyone who comes to our events will tell you they are the most optimistic and positive and poignant events that you could ever go to. And that's what's sweeping the country, a sense of hope that we're going to finally have patriotic, courageous and competent leadership that puts the British people first. That's what Nigel will do as Prime Minister.
OK, well what is the big, big draw for people moving to Reform? Because a lot of people we know come from, not just from the Conservative Party, from Labour as well, or people who haven't voted for a while. But those coming from the Conservative Party, and we saw the Conservative vote basically halved to all intents and purposes at the last general election compared to 2019. That's after, of course, the predecessor of the Reform Party, the Brexit Party, basically stood down a load of candidates to enable Boris Johnson to, quote, get Brexit done. But what we saw is about half those voters who left the Tories either didn't vote at all, or they voted for Reform. And you say your 4 million plus votes. But what are they being drawn to? Is it about being, staunch on things like, culture issues, on anti-woke? Is it about net zero? Is it about immigration? Is it about the economy? What are the policies that people are coming to you for? What is the appeal?
I think it's a combination of things, first amongst which is that Reform offers a truly different way of doing politics. This isn't a party full of career politicians. When Nigel's the Prime Minister, you won't have a cabinet full of people who have gotten to that role because they've carried his bag around for 20 years, which does appear to be the primary qualification, maybe with a slice of corruption in there as well that you need to be in a cabinet at Labour or the Tory party. But look, people are obviously extremely concerned about the porous nature of our borders. 37,000 undocumented people came across the English Channel last year. Those numbers are not declining in any meaningful way.
We've had 100 plus come yesterday.
Net migration was 1 million. Sorry?
We've had more than 100 come yesterday.
Indeed. It's absolutely shocking for a country that spends £54 billion a year and still has a formidable navy. So it's beyond the pale, and British people understand that. Now, when you look at net migration, that number was 1 million last year. The Tories in 4 consecutive manifestos claimed that was going to be tens of thousands. This is something that I don't think a lot of Tory analysts and commentators and people who have been around for a long time appreciate. They still think this is a sort of two-party system. They talk about how long Thatcher took. And look, the reality is you can't lie to the British people so many times, betray them that many times and expect them to forget. The Tory party seems to have pinned their hopes of recovery on this notion that the British people are going to suffer from chronic and sustained catastrophic memory loss. That is not going to happen. And what Reform are offering is an alternative. We're going to cut people's energy bills massively because we're going to end this ridiculous religious cult of net zero, which one should not forget was instituted and legislated and enshrined by the Conservative Party, which is why they can never really attack it meaningfully. Now, Mad Ed Miliband is adding rocket fuel to this disaster. We have the most expensive electricity in the world. Yesterday you had Keir Starmer announcing the UK was going to be an AI superpower when the UK has the most expensive electricity in the world. Anyone who knows anything about AI would have been laughing incredibly hard at that assessment. So the Tory
we were talking about it on the show, pointing out, if our energy costs for businesses are 5 times what they are in America, which is what they are, nobody's going to set up an AI business here when they can set it up in America. End of. Absolute waste of time. I have a funny feeling Keir Starmer doesn't know anything about AI, and that's why he's pursuing this mad policy. But here's the thing. We've seen this move, we've seen Trump in America, we've seen, some various South American elections, in Argentina as well. We're also seeing what's been happening in parliamentary elections in Germany, in Italy, in France and elsewhere. There is this move towards, right-wing parties. Well, they're often called far-right, fascist, but certainly on the hard right, I would say, parties, particularly strong on immigration, net zero, certainly an issue. And yet Britain saw this swing against the Tories, probably for being too left-wing, where we ended up with Labour. Do you think that we are going to be sort of trailing a lot of those other countries in terms of our move inevitably back to the right? And what is the risk, as many are pointing out, in terms of the next general election? Reform are doing well, Tories are doing relatively badly, but you've still got that solid sort of, vote for the Tories from people who voted lifelong, and Labour end up walking in again with another big majority. What would you say to that?
Well, that's simply not going to happen. I mean, firstly, the idea that the British electorate went left is just not supported by the facts and the data. It's a function of the esoteric nature of our first past the post system. Keir Starmer won fewer votes than Jeremy Corbyn. Both times Jeremy Corbyn ran to be Prime Minister. The reason Labour won such a big majority is because the Tory vote absolutely collapsed. 2.6 million Tory voters from 2019 stayed at home last year because they felt utterly betrayed. Many of those are now coming over to Reform as well, by the way, because they see a party that is actually going to deliver on the things that the Tories claimed that they would. And, you know, one thing I'd say as well is 7 months ago when Reform won 14% of the vote, we heard from many critics, including sort of many Tory commentators, you know, the Reform Nigel Farage vote sort of capped at 14-15%. Then it was going to be capped at 20%. We burst through 20%. Now it's sort of capped at 25%. And every time we were implored to do a pact or a deal with the Tories, it's not going to happen because you simply cannot do a pact. You cannot ever trust somebody, I'm afraid, who has betrayed the British people so many times.
Well, again, I've just got to go back to what point I was making a bit earlier about, you know, you could still be riding high in the polls and not actually get the actual number of seats you want. Looking back at 1983, the SDP and Liberals in a SDP Liberal alliance, they won 25% of the vote. That's exactly where you are on the polls right now. But they ended up with only 23 seats. Unless you get above a certain point, it is. I know their vote may be distributed in a different way, but you need to get. You need to be hitting 30%. Yeah, you're on the trajectory for that, no doubt. But you need to be hitting 30% to actually turn it into a serious number of seats.
Well, I'd also add to that, one shouldn't forget, you know, the day of the general election, Reform UK had 0 branches across the country. We now have well over 400 branches across the country. Around the general election time, we had around 50,000 members and people who want to be activists. We are closing in on 200,000. And I will tell you, these people are so... My inbox is slammed and inundated with people wanting to go knock on doors and deliver leaflets. So everything you're talking about is actually why Nigel asked me to become chairman. It's what we've actually spent most of our time, and I include Nigel in that, over the last 7 months, and that's not going to change. We're building a really high-quality ground campaign.
Can I ask, though, we had a caller earlier actually criticising Charlie Mullins, who was on Mike Graham's show, the Pimlico Plumbers chief, who, we're talking about living in Spain now, effectively, most of the time because of the high taxes here. But he's talked about how he wants to be a Reform UK candidate the next election, and we know Nigel Farage is keen on that. And one of our callers said, actually, I would not vote for the party on that alone. As someone who was, Charlie Mullins, staunch pro-lockdown, vaccine mandates. He didn't want people allowed out of their houses if they hadn't had a vaccine. Massive, not just a Remainer, massive Ramona. Why on earth would Nigel Farage, your party leader, want Charlie Mullins to be a candidate for your party, which it seems to me that Charlie Mullins stands for virtually everything the Reform Party stands against?
Listen, I don't know Charlie or very much about him, so I can't really comment.
Maybe someone should check before you allow him to be a candidate.
Well, hold on. We haven't got any candidates announced for the next general election. And look, the vast majority, we're going to go from 5 MPs to north of 325 MPs. That has never been done before. And the vast majority of those people will actually be new to politics. They'll generally be people who've done proper jobs in the outside world. Not that there's anything wrong with career politicians per se, but one reason we are in the lanes that we are.
You were not working in the complaints department at HBOS, no?
Correct. Although apparently now they're going to use AI inside her department, and obviously in most complaints departments, that is what they've now become. They just basically use AI to give you these automated responses, and no doubt Miss Reeves will be receiving many, many complaints.
Zia Youssef, always so good to be joined by you, Chairman of Reform UK. Thank you very much indeed. Sam Armstrong is putting up a very robust fight there. Now, look, you're a Conservative, he's Reform. You'd love to have him batting for your party, wouldn't you?
Well, look, I think the more important thing is I suspect there is a cigarette paper between the sorts of policies I would like to see and the sorts of policies...
And the stuff that Robert Jenrick, you were working on his candidate campaign for Tory leadership, the sort of stuff he was pushing.
I don't think there's much between it. And look, I think there are problems with the Conservative Party. I think there are problems with the Reform Party. I think there are huge problems, though, with the way that our electoral system works. And you set out what happened to the SDP. The fact of the matter is, the Reform Conservative vote share will, at best case scenario, be similar to what it is now at the time of the next election. And if Keir Starmer can hold that together, we know where we're going. It's unavoidable. And look, Reform have got the momentum now. But look, I've been in politics a long time. I know there's going to be hiccups. I know there's going to be things that aren't going to go well, and the Tories will have a better time, and then the Tories will have a worse time. And it's going to go back and forth. And you can hope that at the particular time the election is called,
things are going well.
Despite the fact that the newspapers will take the Tory side, because they always take the Tory side, things are going well.
Do you think Kemi Badenoch is still going to be Conservative leader? I mean, basically, she was supposed to be somebody, very popular with Conservatives. You'd think that the Tories would have gone up in the polls. I think it's too soon for people to forgive the Tories for their failures. But, she's gone, the party's gone down 2 points.
Well, look, Kemi's point is that she needs a little bit more time to prove herself. And
we're going to have some policies at some point. And we're apparently not going to get needed for 2 years. That's just not going to fly with voters.
Look, I think there is a challenge with her sort of replicating Keir Starmer's strategy, that Reform just poses a very, very different type of threat. I think actually what you're seeing is her slightly starting to correct that in recent weeks. I think that's why she's gone so hard on the grooming gangs. I think she has realised that she has to show a little bit of ankle probably sooner than she was first putting across. But Kemi responds, I think it's fair to say, she doesn't always change her mind all that easily. So I think she will change her mind, but it will probably take longer than it could do.
It's going to be very interesting to watch. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what we had, just had the conversation we just had, just with Sam, but with Zia Yusuf as well. 0344 499 1000, your thoughts on Reform, where they are in the polls. What does that tell us about the next election? Give us a call. 0344 499 1000, that is the number to call. This is Talk. We are the home of common sense.
He was Director of Public Prosecutions when I worked on the Rochdale case.
Yeah.
The charges that were levied at the men who were raping dozens of children on a daily basis were painfully inadequate. I repeatedly say the man who got a 13-year-old pregnant didn't even get charged with rape. He was out of prison in less than 4 years. And Keir Starmer was at the head of the CPS at that point.
Across the UK, on DAB+, On your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very good afternoon to you. 12:26 is the time. This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Sam Armstrong also still with me. Let's get straight to your calls. Lots of calls coming in about the interview we just had with Zia Yusuf, the chairman of Reform. Let's go to Tracy, who is in Burton-on-Trent. A very good afternoon to you, Tracy.
Good afternoon, Julia.
Oh, you're happy today. Is it the sunshine? Is it the cost of your winter fuel bill? What is it?
No, my watercolour painting is going quite well, so that's why I'm fairly chirpy.
What are you painting a picture of?
Snowy eagle.
Oh, get you.
Brilliant. Learned in lockdown, Julia, so at least some good came.
Yeah, I learned how to cook Thai food, and I sorted out all my drawers. That was it. Had to have something good. Right, what do you want to say, my darling?
What do I want to say? To be honest, Julia, I wish Sam had stopped telling me what the electorate are going to do. The only winner from the last election was apathy, with huge amounts of people just not voting. Why do I want to see the Tories die a quick death? Mainly because they've lied to me. Actions speak louder than words. They were voted in on multiple occasions to do certain things that we told them to do, and they chose not to do it. Now, I'm sorry, fool me once, my fault, fool me twice, shame on me.
Fool me three times?
I know. No, not doing it. Yeah? They consistently ignored us, okay? Yeah. You consistently ignore me, and the reason they ignored it is because they think they know best. There is an arrogance with them, Julia, that they feel they have a right to exist.
And a right to rule? No, born to rule. Most successful political party in the Western Hemisphere.
Oh, we can't do this because of the EHRC. Oh, we can't do that because, strangely enough, Julia, I grasp it. If I had a majority in Parliament, I can change the law.
What? What are you talking about? They couldn't do anything to deal with They couldn't do anything to deal with the legal visas they chose to give out to immigrants or the migrant. I mean, Tracy, what unreasonable expectations, expecting a country to have a government that governs.
One thing that Reform do, and from some people I've met in Reform, the bulk of these people are everyday people who feel they cannot remain silent any longer. And the thing that Reform gives, and is it perfect? Nobody's perfect, okay? The one thing they give that the other parties aren't giving, they give us hope. Hope that there could be a change.
So it's a very good point, Tracy. Can I put this? Thank you so much. Sam Armstrong's face is a picture on this, but this is it. There is a sort of an energy and a bounce and an optimism around Reform and a belief, patriotism, a belief in the. I mean, I really do feel that, and a sort of a can-do. And there's a lot of boosterism that you see in Nigel Farage and the way he speaks and his policies, such as they have policies. I mean, it was very thin, not a manifesto. But it's very similar to the appeal of Boris Johnson.
Yes, it is. There is no doubt that Nigel Farage is the single most gifted political communicator of this era, and he gives an awful lot of people hope. And there are millions and millions of people who think exactly the same thing as Tracy. On the other hand, there are millions and millions of people that don't like some of the bits of Reform, that are sort of those Tory wets. I mean, Tory wets do not just exist in Parliament, right? They exist in the country. They're the home counties, what used to be the Blue Wall, etc. And political parties that win are coalitions. They always are, always have to be.
But you can't have a coalition that says we're going to have a boost, booming economy, but we're also going to have net zero and make energy impossible. You can't have a coalition that says we're going to have freedom of speech, but you can't say that trans women are actually men. You can't have a coalition that says we're going to tackle immigration and then have 1 million people arriving in this country illegally this year. You can't do it.
Completely and utterly right. That's why I spent 6 months trying to get rid of the last Prime Minister from the Tory party before the election.
To be fair, he did. Let's go to another phone call. Tracy, fantastic call. I hope the painting goes well. Let's go to Andrew in Hertfordshire. Hello, Andrew.
Good afternoon.
Crackerjack from Tracy there, and poor Sam obviously been bashed around the room. But the reality of it is that you've got to look at it in the round. She summed it up quite brilliantly. Hope. So that's why Trump gets in, because he sold hope. So it is a two-party system, and there are parts of the country that could never go Conservative. Scotland, Wales. But in those areas, people that want to do something different, i.e. Welsh Labour or the Scots, SNP, they can now vote for reform safely. And that is the practical reality. And if you look yesterday at Starmer, when he said Rachel Reeves is doing an amazing job, you can take that two ways. So in March, on the 26th of March, the OBR report comes out, and she's toast, done, gone, because we're in recession now. And then the hope is represented by the local authority elections, regardless of how many of them are. And reform will barnstorm through those, because you're going in and you're voting for hope. And it's so interesting that I've always thought that, and that Tracy, who I don't know, is in a different part of the country, that's what she's seen. And you can see it as well in your voice when you responded to her. That's why they'll win. And the Conservative Party died in 2010 when they go into coalition. Farage, what was he voted into the European Parliament as? Was it a Labour MP or a Conservative?
Oh, we've lost you. Hold on, we've lost you, Andrew. I'm so sorry we lost the line, but we've got a load of good points from you. Thank you very much indeed. 12:32 is the time. We're going to take a quick break. Then we are going to be talking about the possibility that really is looking very real now, that we could see an Israel-Hamas ceasefire and the release of so many of those hostages held for well over 400 days now. We're talking to the editor of the Jewish Chronicle, the fabulous Jake Wallace-Simons, up next. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very good afternoon. 12:35 is the time. This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense, for me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Sam Armstrong's still with me. Delighted to be joined now by Jake Wallace-Simons. He's editor of the Jewish Chronicle here in London, but he's also author of the brilliant book Israelophobia, the newest version of The Oldest Hatred and What to Do About It, published before the October the 7th massacres and the start of the war in Gaza. But my goodness me, still a very important read. Jake, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, we are looking at just days away from a Trump inauguration and a presidency of Donald Trump, where he had said if there isn't a deal, a hostage return done before he gets into power, you know, all hell will break out. A lot of pressure on Joe Biden to do something, to get a deal on the table, signed and sealed before his final days as US president. We're now told it's looking like it's on the brink by Joe Biden. We've had Hamas said they had accepted a draft agreement for a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip and the release of dozens of Israeli hostages, according to officials involved in the talks. We've heard a lot of this before. How hopeful are you that this time it really could happen?
Very hopeful indeed. It seems like this is going to happen. I mean, you never know, never say never, but it does seem that hopes are high that this will get over the line. And largely it does seem to be the result of Trump talking tough, raising the question, of course, what if Biden would have talked tough last year? What we have seen then. But look, you know, it is what it is. We are looking at a deal, hopefully, and it will be a 3-phase deal. The first phase will involve the release of, it's thought, 33 Israeli hostages, women, the elderly and the wounded, including, there are hopes that it would include Emily Damari, the British hostage, the 28-year-old woman who's held there, the Spurs fan, as well as 5 female Israeli soldiers. Now, in return, Israel will release a lot of prisoners, 50 prisoners for each of the 5 female soldiers for a start, and commence the withdrawal from Gaza. This will be a 6-week phase. Phase 2 will be a complete Israeli withdrawal in return for all of the remaining hostages. There are 98 living hostages, it's thought, being held in Gaza. And then the final phase will involve the release of the bodies of the remaining hostages and the commencement of a reconstruction plan. So it looks like a serious plan that will lead us to where we want to go, but nerves are high at the moment because it isn't yet over the line.
Indeed. And look, I mean, again, if you were a member of the family or friends of those who were held hostage, that's your #1 priority. But there are other priorities for any government, particularly for the Benjamin Netanyahu government, in terms of preventing future October the 7th as well and the rebuilding of Hamas. Now, they have done, I would say, frankly, a magnificent job of helping to destroy not just Hamas, but also Hezbollah as well, and making Israeli people safer after that awful massacre on October the 7th, 2023. But 465 days in, priority of getting those hostages back, particularly, oh my God, for me, the young children, but also particularly the young women. We know, I mean, we know people who've been released have been beaten and tortured, treated, I mean, horrifically, but we also know about the treatment of these women as sex slaves. I mean, basically being brutally raped. It doesn't even bear thinking about some of the horrific things that have emerged. But, of course, there is also a concern about releasing a load of prisoners, Hamas terrorists among them, back free into Gaza. Hamas being allowed to rebuild. There's a lot of talk. I mean, Joe Biden was talking about, you know, ready for his Democrat supporters, talking about, you know, reconstruction of Gaza. But we know what happened when aid money went in to build Gaza and build a new country for Palestinians living there. It went to Hamas to build tunnels so they could harbour terrorists to launch an attack on October the 7th. So I can understand why many in Israel, particularly the right wing of his government, who I wouldn't agree with on pretty much anything else, are concerned that they're just paving the way for another massacre. What do you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, we do need to try to get our heads around the fact that we're dealing with an enemy here, Hamas, that only wants one thing, which is death and destruction. This is really the definition of evil. They don't want a state. They don't want liberation. They want the deaths of Jews and Israelis. And that's what they want. And the only reason why they're being pushed towards this deal is because of the pressure that you just mentioned, the destruction, almost complete destruction of Hezbollah, the fall of Assad in Syria, and the real weakening of Iran, plus Trump coming in. All of this is bringing huge pressure to bear upon them. But of course, from on the Israeli side, we want to see, or the Israelis want to see, those hostages home. But don't forget, Yahya Sinwar, the architect of the October the 7th massacres, was himself released in a prisoner exchange in 2011. He was one of 1,027 prisoners released in exchange for one Israeli soldier, Gilad Shalit. And he, of course, went on to design and lead the October the 7th atrocities. Now, he said Israel's got his body. Hamas wants the body back as part of the negotiations. Israel at the moment is not agreeing to do that. But it just highlights how important it is that Hamas is completely destroyed and unable to carry out such an October the 7th atrocity again, as they have declared that they want to.
Yes, I mean, they've declared again and again, and we're often told, with moderate Palestinian leadership. There isn't any moderate Palestinian leadership. I've interviewed someone who's apparently moderate Palestinian leader who was cheering on the massacre 3 or 4 days. Well, we knew the detail, well, some of the most horrific details of what happened on October the 7th, was still cheering it on and calling it a great victory for Palestinian people. And this is the concern, isn't it? Now, a lot of this has been brokered by Qatar, and again, happily harbouring Hamas terrorist leadership. They're the ones who aren't living in the tunnels. They're living in their penthouse suites, aren't they, in their multi-million-pound homes in Qatar. But, I mean, this is the thing. The question is, what happens in the future? There's no doubt at all that, Hamas has had a huge amount of losses. I listened to Radio 4 this morning, the usual, tens of thousands of people have died in Gaza. Yes, and best part of 220,000 of those deaths in Gaza have been Hamas terrorists. We should be cheering that on in the same way we would be cheering ISIS terrorists being killed or Al-Qaeda terrorists being killed. But because it's in Gaza, obviously we have to pretend they're all women and children. There's no doubt at all that the Democratic Biden administration has been, basically trying to, play both sides on this, giving support and succour to Benjamin Netanyahu and to the Israeli people, Biden flying to Israel, the day after the massacre, but also at the same time, basically, often condemning perfectly reasonable defensive actions by the Israeli military to kowtow to woke Democrat supporters in America. What do you think is going to change on Monday when Donald Trump is in the White House?
Well, there was a fascinating interview that the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, gave to the New York Times last week, in which he commented that whenever there's been a perception of daylight between the US and Israel, Hamas has hardened its position, prolonging the war and refusing to do a deal to release the hostages. Now, that daylight didn't emerge by accident or by fluke or by an act of God. It emerged every time President Biden criticised Israel publicly, talking about it going over the top, for example. That was a famous phrase that he used. As a result of those sorts of comments, Hamas became more emboldened, thinking they could win by wearing down the American-Israeli alliance, perceiving that daylight to work in their favour. Now, when Trump comes in on Monday, I think we'll see far less of that kind of daylight. I mean, no one really knows what we're going to see from Trump, but there's an expectation or a hope that we will see a much more full-throated support of Israel and uncompromising support against the jihadist terrorists that are threatening it from Gaza, who, of course, would threaten us all if they could. Yes. And that hopefully will lead to a more comprehensive and clear victory against Hamas, which will be ultimately to the benefit of the region in terms of peace.
Yes, and to the benefit of the Palestinian people as well, because they're the organisation.
Free Palestine from Hamas, I think, should be what we're all chanting at the moment.
Absolutely. Really good to talk to you, Jake Wallace-Simons, editor of the Jewish Chronicle. Sam Armstrong, you've been staunch on this. Whenever I get hatred on social media about my stance on Israel, my God, I'm more and more convinced about how right I was. I don't even think it's up to discussion. I don't want innocent children and people to die in Gaza, but that's entirely the fault of Hamas, not the fault of Israel, who are simply defending themselves. But if you were the Israeli Prime Minister, would you want this deal?
Do you know what? I'm not actually sure I would. It seems an extraordinary price to pay 50 terrorists for a single hostage. And that is who you're dealing with. You are dealing with a nasty, despotic, terroristic regime that tolerates no dissent. Any Brit that moved to Gaza would be summarily arrested and executed in short order for expressing
including the Queers for Palestine. I'm sure they'd be very welcome.
Ludicrous organisation on earth. And look, it is a tough deal, and I don't like the idea of Hamas surviving at all, because I do think we're going to be here again. And when a terrorist tells you what they're like,
believe them the first time. I think is that there's an argument, isn't it, that they're not going to be able to destroy Hamas, and therefore getting these people back. I have to say, seen some of the images. There was a video recently of one of the young women held captive, and looking at the video, and the parents have asked for only a couple of images to be used and not the full video, because let's remember her, in her happier days. But again, if it was my child,
Of course.
You know, it's very
but
different.
Prime Minister of a country's got to govern for the whole country and not just those
There's also
families.
an argument that the power that that holding the hostages has given Hamas, if you just said, you know, not negotiating, end of, if everyone dies, so be it, on you, there is an argument that would prevent future hostage taking. There is that argument, and again, that's the we don't pay ransoms argument from many Western governments. Again, the French paid ransoms again and again, kept having their hostages taken because they knew that they would be tens of millions of pounds being paid. But again, very different if it's your family, very different in those scenarios. But it is extraordinary. But whenever anyone, you know, this wokerati on social media just say, oh, you know, we want peace in Hamas, we always say, have you tried giving the hostages back? It's all you've got to do. You stole people, babies, women, children, the elderly. If you give them back, or if you hadn't taken them in the first place, none of this would have happened. This is on Hamas. This is on them, solely on them. End of story. 12:46 is the time. Up next, we're going to talk about, the madness of what's going on in our country as civil service middle management has doubled in a decade. At a time, of course, when we've seen productivity increase so well and our country run so well. So it's obviously been worth the money, hasn't it? Or hasn't it? That's up next. This is Talk.
The most pernicious part of this government is that the messaging, everything they've said, has been very deliberate in regards to, without bringing in the legislation, shutting down opposition speech.
Yes.
Free speech. We've heard it all.
Right.
If you express a view that is not towing the Labour left party line, then you are immediately branded as being far right.
Right.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very good afternoon to you. This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense. 12:50 is the time. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. Sam Armstrong is still with us. Now, Sam, I'm sure you, like me, have every confidence in just how good just how good our wonderful first-class, world-class civil service is. And you'll be delighted to hear that civil service middle management has doubled in the past decade, officials being over-promoted to get around a pay squeeze, so you just have to promote them higher, then they can get a pay rise. And those promotions basically have cost the civil service an extra £2 billion a year. Money well spent?
Well, we have to remember that civil service productivity has gone up by how much in the last 30 years?
Oh, is it? Oh, is it? What's the number? What's the number? Oh, is it? What?
0.
Yes. Well, then, money well spent.
The private sector, on the other hand, are working harder, they're delivering more, and they're paying the taxes. For what? Middle management in HR. Rachel from accounts and Sally from HR.
Accounts and everyone else. Well, look, let's talk about this with William Yarwood. I've got on Mike Yarwood moment there. William Yarwood, he's the media campaigns manager at the Taxpayers Alliance, who got to these figures. Very, very good afternoon to you, William.
Good afternoon, Julia. And don't worry about the mic thing. Jeremy Powell did the exact same thing.
I'm so sorry. It's just of a generation. It's just in your head. I do apologise, William. I mean, these stats are extraordinary. You know, and we see this all the time. You know, just of people being pushed sideways in the civil service. You know, bumped upwards. But basically, look, we're not allowed to give you an above-inflation pay rise, so we'll just give you a better job that comes with a pay rise. But then people basically are promoted often above their abilities, as is often the case in many organisations, and then we're paying them a load more for a long time, but they're now in a job where they're managing other people, but not very well. It kind of explains the mess we're in the civil service, doesn't it?
Yeah, completely. I mean, Britain essentially couldn't be summed up better than a country ran by incompetent middle management, could it? I mean, that's a perfect analogy for modern Britain.
Yeah.
But yeah, these stats are quite extraordinary. I mean, if we did a little briefing, though, just a few months ago, towards the end of last year, that actually showed that the civil service was about 3.7 times bigger than His Majesty's Armed Forces, for crying out loud. So the civil service has grown and grown and grown. And actually, in 2024 alone, there was the biggest increase in the civil service jobs for the last few years. But like Sam said earlier, he took the words right out of my mouth. If there was a level of public sector productivity that's high, things were being delivered, ministers were getting what they needed and what they wanted, I don't think many people have much an issue with this kind of stuff. But the fact of the matter is they're not, because they're not turning up for work, they're doing useless HR and equality, diversity, inclusion roles, and they're wasting millions of pounds of taxpayers' cash while they're doing it.
I mean, the stats are extraordinary. Now, since 2010, the lowest ranks of the civil service, so assistants and administrative officers, that's fallen by 45%. They reckon basically because routine clerical work is now automated, you know, everyone's just doing stuff on the computers and things. But every other rank has grown, and the biggest increase is the number of grade 6 and grade 7 officials. Basically, they're below the senior civil service. But, you know, these people are on good money, and their numbers are up 121%. So they've more than doubled to almost 78,000 people. That's 1 cent to the civil service, twice the proportion in 2010. But this is the extraordinary thing is, if you've got fewer lower grade workers, you wouldn't need more upper grade workers to manage them, because you need fewer to manage them. So we're just basically paying a load of these people a load more money. And again, it's not just their wages, it's their absolutely gold-plated pensions as well. Often a huge percentage of their salary being guaranteed to be paid to them by the taxpayer in the future. Sort of pensions which, I mean, not even no one in the private sector has got.
No, not at all. And if actually those public sector pensions, like you said, which are gold-plated, are not reformed, it actually could end up bankrupting Britain as we know it. I mean, we're pretty bankrupt already as it is, with a £2.7 trillion national debt. But nevertheless, the way in which you deal with this is by government ministers and the Prime Minister himself being bold and saying that they need to reduce civil service numbers. And Keir Starmer himself actually said that he could about 100,000 civil service jobs. And do you know what happened? The head of the trade union that looks after civil service came out and accused him of being a Trumpian populist and using disgraceful language about our wonderful civil service. So as soon as a Labour Prime Minister repeats words that Conservative ministers and Conservative special advisors have been saying for the last few years, granted they didn't do anything about it, but that's not a surprise for Tories, is it? But the fact that Labour Prime Minister Keir Starmer said this and the immediate reaction was that, proves that the amount of resistance there is to reform in the civil service.
Yeah.
And until ministers, until the Prime Minister, and until politicians just in general grow a bit of a spine and recognise this is one of the core reasons why nothing works in this country, then nothing's going to be done.
And this is the thing, it's all very well say we're going to be boosting growth. But again, growth has to come from the private sector. You know, the public sector is there to provide, you know, health service and education and you know, things to transport, infrastructure, you know, things to function to allow the private sector to grow, make money, pay taxes and pay for everything. It's this wonderful circular thing, and it should be sort of symbiotic, very healthy relationship, but not here, because most of the time it's the public sector holding back the private sector, preventing people building, preventing investment, preventing anyone getting anything done, even just down to sort of the bottlenecks in the systems, you know, like planning and things like that, where you just can't get anything done. You can't get paperwork through. You can't get, people couldn't get a driving licence. You know, you still have to wait. I mean, God, you have to wait 6 months to get a driving test in large parts of the country, even now. Oh, because of COVID. COVID was 5 years ago, for goodness sake, and that's still an ongoing problem. And again, these are the bottlenecks imposed by top administration. But we're constantly told still we've got the first class, world class, politically neutral, civil service in the world. That is blatantly untrue now, isn't it?
Yeah, completely. I mean, you look at the amount of equality, diversity, inclusion officers inside various government departments and the amount of civil servants who spend their entire time role-playing as trade union revolutionaries during their trade union facility time hours. So the idea that there's some sort of neutrality in the civil service is completely nonsense. And also there was a really interesting Guardian article just a few months ago.
I've never heard anyone say that before.
I know, well, you know, first time for everything, isn't there, Julia? But there was a really interesting Guardian article by an anonymous civil servant saying that Labour was in power and civil servants could now finally learn to breathe again. Because, of course, the real problem was Tories criticising the civil service for a lack of productivity.
Or just expecting the civil service to do what they are supposed to do and act like servants of elected representatives and do as they're sodding well told. Come on, that's all we ever asked for. William, not really son of Mike Yarwood, William Yarwood, Media Campaigns Manager at Taxpayers Alliance, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Sam Armstrong, I mean, look, you know, you've worked with a lot of people who've worked in government the last 14 years. I mean, basically, the civil service tried to stop Brexit, and they tried to stop anyone getting anything done, tried to stop us acting with illegal migration, reform of the NHS, you name it. I mean, the civil service now are part of the problem.
Yeah, and any minister that sought to stand up to them was immediately almost thrown out after a campaign of leaks, complaints.
All the prominent Brexiteers they went for, Priti Patel, Dominic Raab.
And look,
others.
It's no excuse, but there is a reason why the Tories ended up being so wet and so disappointing, and part of it was the fact that if you tried to do anything that the establishment disliked doing, they would come for you.
Yeah, I have to say, things like the civil servants wanting to go on strike now if they're asked to go into the office for just 3 days a week. Very, very simple. I would do what Elon Musk at X. I expect you all in the office on Monday. Anyone who's not in the office, I will consider you to have tendered your resignation. End of. Nothing to discuss. Same goes for you, Mr. Ian Collins.
Thank you very much. How did the civil service change? When I was a kid, a mate of mine's dad was a civil servant. You know, it was bowler hat, pinstripe stuff. No, but he was more right-wing than Eugene Terre-Blanche, this fella.
So the teachers,
that's what they were all like. They were all like that. And then suddenly, when did this kind of seismic change
Jobs
occur?
for life, not based on merit. That's a very left-wing thing.
Yeah.
Not having to live on your wits, not having to actually prove yourself.
And believing you're entitled to that.
Believing you're entitled to that, exactly. What are you talking about?
We are going to talk about that poll, of course.